Welcome, everyone. As the night settles in, let's drift together into the pages of time, unfolding another tale from the past. Maybe you're already lying in bed, getting relaxed, or simply letting the story keep you company before sleep. Where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know the place and hour of yours these words reach you. And if these gentle tales of lives long ago bring you comfort and rest, I'd be honored to have you stay with me by subscribing to this channel. And now, here's the story. The Eternal Flutter, a love story of Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai. Before empires consolidated under the Qin, while the Warring States era cast long shadows, the tale began. Not in grand palaces, but within the verdant, mist-clad valleys of the eastern province of Zhejiang, in a place known as Shangyu. The story, passed from grandmother to grandchild beside crackling hearths for centuries, became a fixture during the Jin dynasty. Scholars later captured its essence on bamboo and silk, but its true home remained the human heart. It speaks to a time when tradition shaped destiny, when the desires of an individual often dissolved like salt in the ocean of familial duty. This is a history of love, a testament to the spirit's refusal to be bound, and the origin of two butterflies that flutter, eternally linked across the canvas of Chinese culture. The Silken Cage. The morning sun, a pale gold coin, strained to penetrate the thick river mist shrouding the Zhu family estate in Shangyu. The mist clung to the weeping willows, beaded upon spider webs strung between lacquered railings, and muffled the world to a whisper. Within her enclosed chamber, Zhu Yingtai, 16 years of age, felt the damp chill seep through her embroidered silk robes. The brazier of glowing charcoal in the corner fought a futile battle against the pervasive humidity. Her room was a masterpiece of constrained luxury. Intricately carved rosewood furniture, inlaid with mother-of-pearl scenes of phoenixes and peonies, lined the walls. A gauze-thin silk screen, painted with a meticulous landscape of mountains she had never seen, partitioned her sleeping area. Scrolls of poetry, works by Li Bai and Du Fu, lay neatly rolled on a low desk beside an inkstone and fine brushes. This chamber was her entire universe, a library, a garden, and a prison. The sound of her father's voice, firm and decisive, drifted from the main hall with the scent of sandalwood incense. He conversed with Master Gao, a wealthy landowner from a neighboring county. Yingtai needed not hear the words. The rhythm of negotiation, the pauses filled with the sipping of tea, spoke a clear and dreadful language. Her fate was being measured, weighed like bolts of finest Suzhou silk, and found suitable for exchange. Her mother entered, a silent ghost in rich brocade. Madame Zhu's face, still beautiful, though lined with unspoken resignation, held a soft sadness. She carried a new bolt of fabric, a dazzling azure blue threaded with silver. "The blue complements your complexion, my daughter," Madame Zhu said, her voice a gentle murmur. She unfurled a length, the silver threads catching the dim light like captured minnows. Master Gao's son is a scholar, a quiet young man. His household is stable. Stable. Yingtai repeated the word, letting it sit upon her tongue, a flavorless morsel. She gazed past her mother, through the lattice window, to where a sparrow thought to free a twig tangled in the wisteria vine. Does he love the sound of river water, mother? Does he wonder why the cranes dance at dawn? Does his heart beat faster when he reads of great heroes and distant lands? Madame Zhu's hands stilled upon the silk. A profound weariness settled in her eyes. Love is a seed planted in the soil of duty, Yingtai. It grows with time, with shared respect. What beats in a young girl's heart, these are spring storms. They pass. What remains is the family, the home, the legacy. But what of my legacy? Yingtai's question burst forth, a rare defiance that made her mother flinch. To be spun from one silken cage into another? My world defined by these four walls, then by the four walls of a stranger's home? Your legacy, her mother said, her tone regaining its firm softness, is to bring honor to the Zhu name, to bear sons, to manage a household with grace. This is the way, the only way. She placed the azure silk on the bed. We will begin your wedding garments tomorrow. Left alone, Yingtai moved to the window. She pressed her forehead against the cool carved wood. The sparrow had freed itself and flown away. A desperate, wild idea, nurtured in secret for months, took root and surged within her. It was madness. It was treason. It was her only hope. Education, the gateway to a wider world, was forbidden to women. Yet her brother, Zhu Yuan, before his departure to the academy in Hangzhou, had secretly shared his texts with her. She had devoured them, her mind proving more agile than his. She knew the classics, could debate philosophy, and wrote poetry that made her brother stare in stunned silence. The academy at Hangzhou, the Wansong Academy, was the finest in the region. Only men. But what if a man arrived there? Not a coarse, disguised soldier, but a slender, scholarly boy. A boy named Zhu Zhulong, the ninth son. A fictional brother, distant and studious. The plan unfolded in her mind with terrifying clarity. It required stealth, unwavering conviction, and the complicity of one person, her faithful maid, Sing-Sin. That evening, when the household slept, and only the mournful cry of a distant night heron broke the silence, Yingtai revealed her scheme. Sing-Sin, a girl with eyes like black pools, listened in horror that melted into fierce loyalty. "Miss, if you are discovered—" "If I stay, I am entombed," Yingtai whispered, her hands gripping Sing-Sin's. "I will wither like a plum blossom in a sealed jar. Help me, not to run away forever, but to live, just for a few years, to know what it is to be free." Tears traced paths down Sing-Sin's cheeks, but she nodded. The conspiracy began. Yingtai's delicate robes were set aside. From hidden stores, they took coarse, undyed hemp trousers and a tunic. Yingtai bound her budding chest tightly, a physical act of confinement that promised liberation. She practiced a younger, less graceful gait, letting her shoulders slump, deepening her voice to a softer, boyish timbre. Sing-Sin cut her mistress's long, lustrous hair, the locks falling to the floor like severed threads of a former life. The boy who looked back from the bronze mirror had a keen, intelligent gaze and a vulnerable, determined set to his jaw. He was Zhu Zhulong. 3 days later, under the pretext of visiting a distant aunt for seasonal prayers, Yingtai, with Sing-Sin as her sole companion, left the Zhu estate. The carriage rattled not toward the aunt's home, but to a pre-arranged spot where a merchant caravan bound for Hangzhong paused. There, with a final, tearful embrace that conveyed a universe of unspoken words and fears, the 2 young women parted. Sing-Sin returned to the estate, a vessel of terrible secret. Yingtai, now Zhulong, climbed onto the merchant's cart, her heart pounding a wild, hopeful, and terrified rhythm against the restrictive bindings. The cart lurched forward. The familiar landscape of her childhood, the willow-lined riverbanks, the terraced tea fields rolled by, not as a view from a palanquin, but as a world she was now entering, raw and unfiltered. The mist of Shangyu thinned, burned away by a sun that seemed brighter, harsher, and more beautiful than ever before. The silken cage was behind her. Before her lay a road of dust, danger, discovery, and the daunting, glorious prospect of the Wan Song Academy. The road to 1,000 miles. The merchant cart, laden with bolts of rough-spun cloth and pungent sacks of dried ginger, became Zhu Zhulong's first classroom in the art of becoming a man. The world, unfiltered by palanquin screens, was a symphony of overwhelming sensations. The dust of the road, fine and ochre-colored, coated his tongue and settled into the fibers of his coarse hemp clothes. The sun beat upon his neck, a persistent heat unfamiliar to his sheltered skin. He sat hunched among the other passengers, a grizzled farmer clutching a bamboo cage with 2 clucking hens, a talkative potter whose wares clinked with every rut in the road, and a silent monk whose eyes remained closed in perpetual meditation. The merchant, a man named Guo, with a face like tanned leather and a voice accustomed to barking over market din, eyed the slight young scholar. "To Hanzhou for the exams, boy?" he asked, spitting a stream of betel nut juice onto the thirsty road. Zhulong. Yingtai forced the name to the forefront of her consciousness. "To study first, uncle, at the Wan Song Academy." A snort came from the farmer. "Books. My brother's son went for books, came back with empty pockets and a head full of clouds." The hens clucked in seeming agreement. The potter, however, leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Wan Song, a noble pursuit. I once fired a set of inkstones for the chancellor. Fine-grained clay from the Qiangtong riverbank. The chancellor himself said the ink tasted sweeter upon them." He launched into a detailed monologue about the mineral properties of local clays. Yingtai listened, a strange exhilaration bubbling beneath her terror. This was discourse, crude and unfettered. These men spoke of practical things, of flavors and clays and the price of grain. Their world was tangible, immediate. She was not Zhu Yingtai, a commodity to be discussed in hushed tones over tea. She was Zhu Zhilong, a listener, a passenger, a person whose opinion, while not yet sought, was at least not predetermined by her sex. The journey lasted 3 days. They slept in roadside inns, large, noisy halls where men slurped noodle soup and gambled with dice by candlelight. Yingtai claimed a corner, curling her body around the small bundle containing her few possessions: her brother's old texts, a change of clothes, a purse of silver, and a jade pendant shaped like a lotus leaf, her mother's secret gift pressed into her hand at the final moment. She slept fitfully, hyper-aware of every snore, every footfall, her hand clenched around the pendant beneath her tunic. On the second afternoon, the road wound alongside the mighty Qiantong River. The water, wide and powerful, churned a muddy brown, its surface dappled by the late sun. The potter pointed. "See the boar tide? Not today, but when it comes, a wall of water taller than 3 men, roaring like 1,000 dragons. It sweeps everything before it." He looked at Julong. "Life is like that, young scholar. It has its calm currents and its irresistible tides. Best to know which is which." The observation struck Yingtai with profound force. She was caught in a tide now, one of her own making. Could she ride it, or would it dash her against the rocks of discovery and disgrace? She gazed at the relentless flow of the river, a mirror to the irreversible flow of her decision. Hangzhou announced itself first with scent. The damp, earthy smell of the river delta melded with the aroma of roasting chestnuts, frying dough, and the underlying tang of salt and humanity. Then came the sound, a low, constant hum that grew into a cacophony of hawkers' cries, cartwheels on stone, and the distant clang of temple bells. Finally, the city walls rose, immense and forbidding, their gray stone stained by centuries of weather and siege. The cart passed through the towering gate, entering a stream of humanity so dense it stole Yingtai's breath. Streets, narrow canyons lined with wooden buildings whose upper stories leaned precariously towards each other, teemed with life. Silk-gowned merchants brushed shoulders with bare-chested porters sweating under impossible loads. Street vendors offered everything from steaming buns to cleverly forged bronze mirrors. A tooth puller displayed his grim trophies on a bloody cloth, while a storyteller captivated a crowd with tales of Monkey King. Guo the merchant halted near a bustling market square. "This is where my road ends, boy. Wan Song Academy is on the western hill, near the Lingyin Temple. Follow the stream of blue-robed scholars. You'll find it." Yingtai alighted, her legs stiff, her bundle suddenly feeling insignificantly small. She bowed deeply to Guo. "Thank you for the passage, uncle." Guo grunted, but his eyes held a flicker of paternal concern. "Keep your wits and your purse close, scholar. Not all here seek wisdom." Alone, Zhu Zhulong was swallowed by the city's pulse. The directive to follow blue robes proved wise. Soon she spotted a pair of young men, their gowns the color of a clear autumn sky, their hair neatly tied under simple black caps, walking with the purposeful air of those who knew their destination. She trailed them at a distance, her senses overwhelmed, but her focus sharp. The cacophony of the market district gradually softened. The buildings became less cramped, the air cooler, scented with pine and damp stone. They followed a cobbled path that wound up a wooded hill. The sound of the city faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through countless pine needles, the wan song, or 10,000 pines, that gave the academy its name. The atmosphere shifted from chaotic vitality to serene solemnity. The academy gates were not ornate, but they held a weight of austere authority. Made of dark, aged timber, they stood open, leading into a compound of low, tile-roofed buildings around quiet courtyards. The silence here was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic chant of students reciting texts. The vibe was one of concentrated intellect, a world apart from the sensual frenzy of the city below. At the gatehouse, an elderly gatekeeper with a beard like wisps of old snow looked up from his ledger. Name and purpose? Ying Tai's heart hammered against her ribs. She willed her voice to remain steady. This humble one is Zhu Zhulong from Shangyu. I seek to study under the venerable masters of Wan Song. She produced a letter of introduction, a document painstakingly forged by her own hand over many secret nights, using her father's official seal she had stolen a wax impression of years prior. The gatekeeper examined the seal, his eyes sharp. He looked from the document to the slender, travel-stained boy before him. The silence stretched. A droplet of sweat traced a path down Ying Tai's spine beneath the rough hemp. The chancellor admits students on the first day of each month, the gatekeeper intoned finally. Today is the 29th. You may wait in the visitors' quarters. He gestured to a simple building to the left. You will be summoned for an examination of your classical knowledge when the chancellor is available. Relief, warm and weak, flooded Ying Tai's limbs. The first barrier was crossed. She bowed again, lower this time. This humble student is grateful. The visitors' quarters were a long, plain hall filled with simple cots. A few other aspirants were there, each lost in their own worlds of anxiety or preparation. One boy, his face pale, muttered passages from the Analects to himself. Another polished a single precious inkstone over and over. Ying Tai chose a cot in a corner. She placed her bundle beneath the thin pillow and sat, her hands trembling slightly. She had arrived. Zhu Zhulong existed within the hollowed walls of Wan Song. The silken cage of Shangyu was 1,000 li away. But a new cage surrounded her now. A cage of perpetual vigilance, of suppressed instinct, of a secret that must remain buried deeper than any classical text. The air, fragrant with pine and old paper, was the sweetest she had ever breathed, and the most perilous. Outside the hall's window, the first stars began to prick through the twilight over the 10,000 pines. Her adventure, her true life, was poised to begin at dawn. The Chancellor's gaze. The night in the visitors' quarters was a symphony of unfamiliar noises. The straw-filled mattress crackled with every slight movement. The boy reciting the Analects whispered in his sleep, a ghostly murmur of Confucian virtues. The wind, channeled through the valley of pines, produced a low, mournful sigh that seeped through the wooden shutters. Ying Tai, curled on her side, did not sleep. Her mind raced, rehearsing responses to potential questions, visualizing the stern face of the chancellor, feeling the constricting bindings around her chest, a constant physical reminder of the lie she embodied. The air, fragrant with pine and old paper, was the sweetest she had ever breathed, and the most perilous. Outside the hall's window, the first stars began to prick through the twilight over the 10,000 pines. Her adventure, her true life, was poised to begin at dawn. The night in the visitors' quarters. The night in the visitors' quarters was a symphony of unfamiliar noises. The straw-filled mattress crackled with every slight movement. The boy reciting the analects whispered in his sleep, a ghostly murmur of Confucian virtues. The wind, channeled through the valley of pines, produced a low, mournful sigh that seeped through the wooden shutters. Ying Tai, curled on her side, did not sleep. Her mind raced, rehearsing responses to potential questions, visualizing the stern face of the chancellor, feeling the constricting bindings around her chest, a constant physical reminder of the lie she embodied. Dawn arrived not with a sunrise, but with a gradual lightening of the gray gloom, accompanied by the resonant clang of a bronze bell from the heart of the academy compound. Its sound was deep and clear, vibrating in the cool, pine-scented air. It was a sound that spoke of discipline, order, and the commencement of intellectual labor. The other aspirants stirred, their faces etched with a mixture of dread and hope. They performed their ablutions at a stone trough in the courtyard, the water so cold it stole the breath. Ying Tai imitated their movements, careful to maintain a modest, boyish distance, splashing her face and smoothing back her short-cropped hair. A senior student, his blue robe crisp and his bearing rigid, appeared at the doorway. Aspirants, you will be seen in the Hall of Clear Reflection. Follow me. Maintain silence. They formed a loose line, a procession of nervous ambition. The senior student led them through a series of interconnecting courtyards, each more tranquil than the last. The buildings, with their upswept eaves dark with age, seemed to watch their passage. In one courtyard, an ancient plum tree, its branches gnarled like a sage's hands, stood sentinel over a perfectly raked gravel garden. The only sounds were the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel and the distant, rhythmic chanting from a lecture hall. The Hall of Clear Reflection was a long, high-ceilinged room, spare to the point of severity. Light filtered through latticed windows, falling in geometric patterns on the polished dark wood floor. At the far end, upon a low dais, sat Chancellor Wang. He was a man of indeterminate age, his hair and long beard the color of iron dust. His face was a landscape of deep lines, but his eyes, black and penetrating, held a restless, youthful intelligence. He wore a simple dark robe, unadorned. Before him, on a low desk, lay a scroll, an inkstone, and a single brush. The aspirants knelt on the mats arranged in a row before the dais, their heads bowed. The air in the room felt thin, charged with a silent pressure. Ying Tai kept her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood floor, feeling the Chancellor's scrutiny pass over them like a physical touch. To seek knowledge is to step onto a path with no end. Chancellor Wang's voice broke the silence, dry and precise like pages turning. It is a path of humility, of relentless questioning, of forsaking comfort. Song is not a haven for the indolent, nor a stepping stone for the merely ambitious. It is a forge. Your minds will be heated, hammered, and tested. Some metal will prove true, some will shatter. He paused, letting his words settle. You each present a letter, a seal, a name. These are just ink and paper. I am interested in the mind behind the name. You will be tested not on your memory, but on your understanding. Not on what you have learned, but on how you think. One by one, he called the aspirants forward. He posed riddles from the Zhou Yi, asked for interpretations of obscure passages from Zhuangzi, demanded they draw parallels between historical events in the records of the Grand Historian and the current governance of the province. The boy who had muttered in his sleep stammered and fell silent. The boy with the inkstone gave a competent but derivative answer. Each performance was met with Chancellor Wang's impassive gaze, a slight nod, or a barely perceptible flicker of disappointment. Then he called Zhu Zhulong. Yingtai rose, her legs feeling unsteady. She approached the dais, knelt again, and kept her head respectfully lowered. From Shangyu, Chancellor Wang stated, glancing at her forged letter, the Zhu family is known for silk, not scholars. A family may have more than one thread to its weave, Chancellor responded, her voice carefully modulated. The analogy, drawn from her own hidden experience, came unbidden. A faint eyebrow twitched on the Chancellor's stony face. Indeed. Tell me, Zhu Zhulong, a passage in the Tao Te Ching states, knowing the masculine, keep to the feminine. How does a young scholar, embarking on a masculine pursuit of knowledge and public service, reconcile with this instruction to keep to the feminine? The question struck Yingtai's heart like a bolt of ice. It felt less like a philosophical inquiry and more like a trap, a probe aimed directly at her secret core. She forced her breathing to remain even. She could not speak of true femininity. That was a locked room within her. She must speak of principle. Esteemed Chancellor, she began, her mind racing over the texts she had consumed. The sage does not interpret feminine to mean the absence of strength, but the strength of receptivity, of flexibility, of yielding. Water, which is soft and yielding, wears away the hardest stone. The pursuit of knowledge is a masculine act of acquisition, but the holding of knowledge, the allowing of it to shape and guide one's actions without rigid dogma, that is the feminine principle. A scholar must be both, aggressive in his quest, yet humble and adaptable in his understanding. To keep to the feminine is to avoid the brittleness of absolute certainty. The hall was utterly silent. Chancellor Wang's eyes, those twin pools of obsidian, remained fixed on her. The pause stretched, each heartbeat a thunderclap in Yingtai's ears. And the Book of Songs, he continued, his tone giving no indication of his thoughts. Many verses speak of longing, of love separated by distance or duty. Are these merely romantic fancies, or do they hold a lesson for a scholar official? Ying Tai felt a pang of genuine emotion, thinking of her own forced departure, of the life she had left behind. The songs are the echo of the human heart, Chancellor. A ruler who cannot understand the longing of his people for peace, for home, for connection, is a ruler deaf to the music of his own kingdom. The songs teach empathy, and an official without empathy is a tool, not a servant. Chancellor Wang leaned back slightly. He unrolled the scroll before him. It was a map, not of provinces, but of the constellations. "Point to the weaving maid star," he commanded. This was a test of basic, practical knowledge, often associated with the feminine arts of astrology and seasonal rites. Fortunately, Ying Tai's mother had taught her the night sky. Without hesitation, she pointed to the correct spot on the parchment. "And the herd boy." Her finger moved to the opposite side of the Milky Way, the celestial river. The myth of the separated lovers, the weaving maid and the herd boy, who met only once a year on a bridge of magpies, hung unspoken in the air between them. Chancellor Wang stared at her for a long, long moment. His gaze seemed to pierce through the coarse hemp tunic, through the bindings, to the very knot of fear and determination in her soul. Ying Kai held her breath, convinced the game was over, that he saw the truth laid bare. Finally, he gave a single, slow nod. "Your answers display an unusual perspective. Not rigid, but pliant. Not bombastic, but considered. The forge will test your mettle, Zhu Zhilong. You may remain. Find Scholar Master Li in the 3rd courtyard. He will assign you a cell and your duties." The relief was so profound it threatened to buckle her knees. She bowed until her forehead touched the cool floor. This unworthy one thanks the Chancellor for his grace. As she rose and turned to leave, walking back past the other aspirants, she felt the Chancellor's eyes on her back. It was not a gaze of dismissal, nor one of simple acceptance. It was a gaze of deep, unsettled curiosity. He had not seen through her disguise, she believed, but he had sensed a different frequency in her thinking, a subtle otherness that intrigued him. It was a dangerous interest. In the austere, masculine world of Wansong, to be remarkable was to be scrutinized, and scrutiny was the one thing she could not afford. Stepping out of the hall of clear reflection into the misty morning courtyard, Ying Tai felt a new layer of complexity settle upon her. She was in, but the walls of her new cage, built of watchful eyes and intellectual rigor, were already rising around her. The path ahead was no longer just about maintaining a disguise. It was about navigating the perilous currents of a distinguished mind's attention. The Brotherhood of Ink. Scholar Master Li presided over the 3rd courtyard, a space dedicated to the newest and youngest students. He was a contrast to Chancellor Wang. Where the Chancellor was a carved cliff face, Li was a comfortable, worn-out hill. His robe was perpetually dusted with chalk, and his spectacles, a rare and precious luxury, perched on the end of his nose. His voice, when he addressed the dozen new boys assembled before him, was a friendly drone, like a contented bee. "Welcome, Sprouts," he said, peering over his spectacles. Here you will learn the roots before you reach for the branches, calligraphy, the history of the characters, the basic commentaries on the 4 books. Discipline is the water. Diligence is the sun. Without both, you will remain a stunted thing. He assigned them their cells, tiny, Spartan rooms just large enough for a sleeping mat, a low desk, and a shelf for scrolls. Ying-Tai's cell was at the end of a long, quiet corridor, a fact for which she was immensely grateful. Her room looked out onto a small walled garden where a single ancient cassia tree grew, its branches promising autumn fragrance. Her first duty was to fetch water for the courtyard's ink grinding. Each morning before the first bell, she joined a line of other junior students to haul buckets from the deep, cold well at the academy's eastern edge. The physical labor was a new kind of exhaustion. The wooden yoke bit into her shoulders, the weight of the full buckets making her muscles tremble. She watched the other boys, some struggling, some bearing the load with ease, and mimicked their movements, hiding her strain behind clenched teeth and measured breaths. It was during this chore, on her 3rd day, that she first properly encountered Liang Shanbo. The well queue was a quiet, sleepy line. A boy ahead of her, tall and lanky, with a posture that suggested he wished to fold himself into a smaller space, fumbled with his bucket. The rope slipped, the bucket plunged back into the dark water with a loud splash, and the boy stumbled back, his spectacles, another rare pair, nearly following the bucket down. He caught them clumsily, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Without thinking, Ying-Tai stepped forward. "The knot needs to be a double fisherman's bend," she said softly, taking the rope from his hands. Her father had taught Zhu Yuan such knots for securing boats on their river. Her fingers, remembering a different life, worked deftly, twisting and securing the rope. The wet hemp slips. This will hold. The boy, Liang Shanbo, blinked through his smudged spectacles, his expression one of profound gratitude and surprise. Thank you. I am a danger to myself and the Academy's property before dawn." His voice was gentle, tinged with a self-deprecating humor that was instantly disarming. "It is nothing," Ying-Tai said, turning quickly to fill her own bucket, suddenly aware of the proximity, of having initiated contact. She had to be careful. Friendliness was natural, but intimacy was a minefield. Yet fate, it seemed, had other plans. Scholar Master Li, in his benign wisdom, assigned seating in the lecture hall by the order of their names in the registry. Zhu Zhulong found himself placed directly next to Liang Shanbo. The shared desk became a world unto itself. Shanbo's handwriting was earnest but sprawling, his characters sometimes running off the page like escaping livestock. Ying-Tai's, cultivated through years of secret, meticulous practice, was small, precise, and elegant. During a lesson on the doctrine of the mean, Shanbo groaned softly as a blot of ink spread like a dark stain of ignorance across his parchment. "Scholar Master Li will think I am advocating for moral blurriness," he whispered despairingly. Ying-Tai, acting on an impulse she could not suppress, took a spare brush, dipped it in clean water, and with a few delicate touches blurred the edges of the blot, integrating it into the character for sincerity he had been writing, transforming the mistake into an intentional artistic flourish. Shanbo stared, then looked at her with something akin to awe. "Julong, you are an artist, a savior." "Merely a different kind of blurriness," she whispered back, a faint smile touching her lips before she could stop it. From that moment, a bond was forged. Shanbo, the son of a minor clerk from a poor but respectable family, was intellectually brilliant but practically hapless. He grasped complex philosophical paradoxes with ease, but could not keep his robe tidy. He could recite entire chapters of Mencius, but would forget to eat his midday rice. Yingtai, as Julong, became his quiet anchor. She would subtly straighten his collar before a lecture, remember to bring an extra ink stick when his ran out, and explain the practical steps of a classical rite that his theoretical mind glossed over. In turn, Shanbo opened a window to a mind Yingtai found dazzling. His interpretations of texts were not regurgitations, but living dialogues. "Look," he would say, his eyes alight, pointing to a passage about benevolent rule. "The sage king doesn't just feed the people. He creates a system where the people learn to feed each other. It's about patterns, Julong, like the patterns in nature." Their friendship grew in the quiet spaces, studying side by side under the cassia tree as the light faded, sharing a single precious orange brought by Shanbo from a rare trip to the city, huddling over a brazier in the depths of winter, debating whether a true gentleman's integrity was an innate jade or a carved sculpture. Yingtai lived in a constant state of exquisite tension. The joy of this companionship, this meeting of minds she had never dreamed possible, was a balm and a torment. Every laugh they shared, every confidential whisper, was layered with the bittersweet knowledge of her deception. She found herself cataloging his traits, the way he pushed his spectacles up his nose when thinking deeply, the slight gap between his front teeth that appeared when he grinned, the earnest furrow of his brow when he was worried for her, thinking she looked too pale or too thin. She kept a vigilant distance in all physical matters. She insisted on bathing alone, always the last to use the communal bathhouse after the water was cold and the room empty. She changed her clothes in the utter privacy of her cell. When they walked, she maintained a careful gap. When they slept during a long study trip to a nearby temple, she lay rigid on her mat, listening to his steady breathing a few feet away, a chasm of truth between them. One afternoon, while practicing archery, a required martial skill for scholars, Shanbo's arrow went wildly astray, nearly striking a senior student. The older boy, a bully named Ma Wensai from a wealthy family, marched over, his face flushed with anger. "Clumsy fool, you should be copying texts, not handling weapons," Ma Wensai snarled, shoving Shanbo backward. Shanbo, off balance, stumbled and fell. Before Yingtai could think, she stepped between them, her heart pounding but her voice calm. "The fault was in the instruction, Senior Ma, not the pupil. The grip was not properly demonstrated." She spoke not with aggression, but with a pointed clarity that drew the attention of a passing instructor. Ma Wensai glared at this slight, defiant junior. "And you are an expert, Zhujilang. "You shoot like a girl." The words, intended as the ultimate insult, struck Yingtai like a physical blow. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I shoot like a student who listens." Perhaps if Senior Ma listened more to the masters and less to his own voice, his own aim, in scholarship and in conduct, would improve. The barb landed. Ma Wensai's eyes narrowed, storing away this humiliation. He spat on the ground near Shanbo and stalked off. Yingtai helped Shanbo to his feet. His hand was warm and solid in hers. She released it the moment he was steady. "You shouldn't have," he said, his voice thick with shame and gratitude. "I couldn't just watch," Yingtai said simply, the truth of it resonating deep within her. In that moment, protecting Shambo had felt as natural and necessary as breathing, a reflex that overrode all caution. That night, as they reviewed texts by the light of a single lamp, Shanbo was quiet. Finally, he said, "You are the best friend I have ever had, Julong. Better than a brother. My mind feels clearer when I am with you. My world makes more sense." The words filled Yingtai with a piercing agony of happiness. Tears threatened, hot and insistent. She blinked them back, staring hard at the flickering flame. "And you, Shambo," she managed, the words a bare whisper, carrying a weight of meaning he could never decipher. In the dim light, the shadows danced on the walls, weaving together like their lives. Inseparable, yet built upon a foundation of silent, beautiful lies. Whispers in the Pines. The seasons wheeled above Wansong Academy, each turning marked by a shift in the light, the scent on the wind, and the texture of the silence. Spring arrived with a virulent green blush on the 1,000 pines and the delicate, heartbreaking fragrance of peach blossoms from the orchard beyond the east wall. The scholarly routine was a drumbeat, the pre-dawn bell, the grueling water hall, morning lectures on ritual and music, afternoon dissections of history and poetry, evening hours of solitary study by the flickering light of a rapeseed oil lamp. Within this rigid framework, the friendship between Zhu Zhulong and Liang Shambo flourished like a wild orchid in a crack of granite. Their reputation grew among the student body. They were known as a pair, the philosopher and the poet, some called them. Shanbo, with his sprawling, visionary ideas, would weave grand theories about statecraft drawn from the patterns of migrating geese or the flow of mountain streams. Julong, with his precise, elegant mind, would ground those theories, finding the classical precedents, writing them down in flawless, persuasive prose that even Chancellor Wang would occasionally read with a grunt of approval. Their joint essays became minor legends, passed from hand to hand. Yet with this visibility came new perils. Ma Wenkai, the senior student whose pride Yingtai had wounded, watched them with a jealous, resentful eye. He came from a line of powerful provincial officials. His path to a bureaucratic post was smooth and assured. The genuine, unforced brilliance of the two low-born friends was an insult to his inherited privilege. He began to spread subtle, corrosive whispers. "They are too close," he would murmur to his cronies in the bathhouse steam. "Like a pair of mandarin ducks, always together. It is not natural for young men to be so devoted. Where is the boisterousness, the drinking games? Zhu Julong is so delicate, he bathes alone in the cold, a peculiar fastidiousness. The rumors were vague, but in the hyper-masculine, conformist environment of the academy, they found fertile ground. Other students began to look at them with a flicker of curiosity, a slight distancing. Shanbo, lost in his thoughts, seemed oblivious. But Yingtai, whose survival depended on reading every social current, felt the change in atmosphere like a drop in barometric pressure. A chill had entered the air around their warm companionship. The threat crystallized during the Mid-Autumn Festival. The Academy allowed a modest celebration. Lanterns were hung in the main courtyard. Mooncakes stuffed with sweet bean paste were distributed. And for one evening, the strict rules were relaxed. A space was cleared for poetry recitation and even modest revelry. Shanbo, emboldened by a sip of rice wine, was persuaded to recite a poem he had composed. He stood in the lantern light, his blue robe seeming to absorb the soft glow, and began to speak. The poem was about the moon, but not as a cold celestial object. It was a lament, a lonely, beautiful thing separated from the warm earth, its light a yearning for connection. His voice, usually gentle, took on a passionate, haunting quality. O jade disk adrift in the river of night, your borrowed light a perpetual sigh. Do you gaze upon a single earthly light and mourn the endless sea of sky? The courtyard fell quiet. It was a shockingly personal, emotional piece, more suited to a romantic troubadour than a dispassionate scholar. When he finished, there was a stunned silence, then scattered, polite applause. Ma Wensai's voice cut through the quiet, loud with false bonhomie. A touching verse, Liang Shanbo, most feminine in its sensitivity. Tell me, was it inspired by a longing for a sweetheart back home, or perhaps by a closer muse? His eyes slid meaningfully towards Zhu Julong, who stood at the edge of the crowd. A few nervous titters followed. Shanbo's face, flushed with the thrill of performance, went pale. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came, only confusion and dawning hurt. Yingtai acted without conscious thought. She stepped forward, into the pool of lantern light, drawing all eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was cool and clear, a blade of winter ice. Senior Ma mistakes artistic empathy for personal confession, she stated, her gaze holding Ma Wen's eyes. The book of songs is filled with such yearnings, voiced by soldiers, by farmers, by ministers. To feel the loneliness of the cosmos is not feminine, Senior Ma. It is human. It is the foundation of benevolence. A ruler who cannot fathom the moon's loneliness can never comprehend the loneliness of a single starving subject in a distant village. My friend Shanbo's poem is not a trivial romance. It is an exercise in statecraft. You hear a love song. A true scholar hears the cry of all isolated things. The rebuttal was devastating. It reframed the intimate as the universal, turning Ma Wensai's sneer into a mark of shallow interpretation. Chancellor Wang, who had been observing from the shadows of a corridor, gave a slow, approving nod. The mood in the courtyard shifted palpably. The snickers died. Ma Wen-sai, outmaneuvered intellectually and publicly, could only force a thin smile and melt back into the crowd. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Later, as the lanterns guttered and students retired, Shanbo found Yingtai by the deserted well. The moon, now high and bright, cast their long, thin shadows on the ground. "Julong," Shanbo said, his voice troubled. "What he implied about us, it is foul." "It is ignorance," Yingtai said quickly, turning to draw water she did not need to avoid his eyes. "But why does he say such things?" Shanbo persisted. "Because we are friends? Because we prefer each other's company to carousing with the others? Is friendship now suspect?" The raw bewilderment in his voice was a knife in Yingkai's soul. She wanted to scream the truth, to let the secret explode into the moonlight and shatter the terrible, beautiful lie. But she saw Sin-Sin's tear-streaked face, her father's stern eyes, the irreversible ruin that would follow. "The world is small-minded, Shanbo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It fears what it does not understand. What we have, our friendship, it is a rare thing. It exists outside their comprehension. We must be more careful, for the sake of our studies." The last sentence tasted like ash. Shanbo was quiet for a long time, looking up at the moon he had just poeticized. "When I am with you, Julong, I feel I am my truest self. The world makes sense. I would not trade that, not for all their acceptance." He turned to her, his spectacles gleaming in the lunar light. "But I will be more careful. I will not give them fuel for their gossip. I will keep a little distance in public." His promise to protect their friendship by stepping away was the cruelest twist of all. Yingtai could only nod, a lump of unshed tears blocking her throat. The moon, that lonely jade disk, bore witness to the new invisible wall they had agreed to build between them. The whispers in the pines had done their work. Their paradise, once a sun-dappled grove of shared minds, now had a serpent in it, and its name was not temptation, but truth, a truth that could not be spoken, and therefore poisoned everything it touched. The path ahead was no longer just one of concealment, but of deliberate, heartbreaking separation, for the sake of preserving the very bond it was destroying. The unseen river. A deliberate distance, once decided upon, became its own peculiar torment. Yingtai and Shanbo moved through their days like paired stars in a constrained orbit, their gravitational pull palpable, yet their trajectories carefully calculated to avoid collision. In the lecture hall, they no longer shared whispered asides. During meals, they sat at opposite ends of the long table, Shanbo surrounded by a boisterous group, Yingtai often choosing solitude or the company of the quietest, most bookish students. In the evenings, they studied in their separate cells. The academy breathed a sigh of conventional relief. The rumors, deprived of fresh fuel, began to dissipate. Ma Wenkai, though still watchful, turned his malice toward other targets. To the outside world, Zhu Julong and Liang Shanbo were merely two promising students who had outgrown an overly intense juvenile friendship. It was normal. It was proper. But the reality was a landscape of silent communication and aching absence. They developed a language of glances, a lifted eyebrow across the courtyard during a tedious recitation on tax policy, a slight, almost imperceptible shake of the head when a fellow student gave a particularly foolish answer, a meeting of eyes held a second too long when a line of poetry about parting was read aloud, then swiftly broken. Their physical separation made Yingtai hyper-aware of Shanbo in new, excruciating ways. She would recognize the sound of his cough from 3 courtyards away. She could identify the particular shuffle of his straw sandals on the flagstones. She knew the exact angle at which he tilted his head when lost in thought, a silhouette against the paper window of his cell. Each detail was a treasure and a thorn. The strain manifested physically in Yingtai. The constant vigilance, the emotional starvation, the unrelenting physical labor, and the tight chest bindings began to wear her down. She grew paler, thinner. A persistent, dry cough took root in her chest. Scholar Master Li noticed, his kindly face furrowed with concern. "Julong, you work too hard by lamplight. The body is the root of the scholar's tree. You must nourish it. Eat more of the pork at supper. Walk in the pine groves to clear your lungs." She would nod obediently, but the thought of eating the rich, greasy food made her stomach turn. The walks she took, but they were lonely, melancholy circuits where her thoughts spiraled endlessly around the central, immutable fact of her deception. One afternoon, a violent spring storm lashed the academy. Rain fell in gray diagonal sheets, drumming on the tile roofs and turning the courtyards into shallow, muddy lakes. Wind screamed through the pine forest, the sound a furious, rolling ocean. Lectures were canceled, students huddled in their cells or the main hall. Yingtai, feeling a peculiar restlessness, wrapped herself in a cloak and slipped out to the one place she found solace, the small walled garden with the cassia tree. Here, under the lee of the wall and the tree's thick branches, she found a patch of relative dryness. She stood, watching the rain needle the puddles, feeling the storm's energy vibrate in the air. It mirrored the tempest within her. She did not hear his approach over the wind's roar. A presence beside her made her start. It was Shanbo, also cloaked, his spectacles spotted with rain. "I saw you come out," he said, his voice raised slightly against the storm. "You shouldn't be in this weather. You've been unwell." "The air is clean now," she replied, not looking at him. "It washes everything away." They stood in silence for a long moment, side by side but not touching, watching the fury of the elements. The enforced distance of the past weeks seemed trivial against the raw power of the storm. The tension between them, usually a tight, silent wire, now felt like a current in the charged air. "I cannot bear it, Julong," Shanbo said suddenly, the words ripped from him by the wind, or by a deeper gale within. This performance, this pretending you are just another face in the hall, it is a lie. It feels like a betrayal of what we are." Yingtai's breath caught. The rain plastered her short hair to her forehead, cold and real. "What are we, Shanbo?" she asked, the question hanging between them, perilous and profound. He turned to her, his face open, vulnerable, utterly confused. "I do not know. Brothers? Friends? Minds that are two halves of one thought? I only know that when we are apart, the world is muted. The colors are dull. My thoughts are formless until I imagine sharing them with you." He gestured helplessly at the storm. "This has meaning because you are here to see it. Otherwise, it is just noise and water." The honesty was a balm and an agony. It was everything she felt mirrored back at her, yet still trapped in the wrong frame. He spoke of brotherhood, of intellectual companionship. She felt the searing, unnamed truth of a different kind of love, one that had no place in his understanding of their world. "The world demands certain shapes of us," she said, her voice trembling. "We must fit the vessels made for us, or we spill and are wasted." "To hell with the vessels!" Shanbo's outburst was shocking, coming from his gentle mouth. "What is scholarship for, if not to question the shape of the vessels? What is wisdom for, if not to know that a river blocked will find a new course?" He reached out, his hand stopping just short of grasping her arm. "Julong, promise me, whatever happens, whatever posts we take, whatever distances lie between us in the future, we will not let this connection be blocked. We will find a way, like the river finds the sea." He was speaking of letters, of visits, of a lifelong intellectual partnership. She heard a plea she could never honor. The tears that mingled with the rain on her face were real. "I promise," she whispered, the lie a necessary stone in her heart, "like the river finds the sea." A deafening crack of thunder split the sky directly overhead, a blinding flash of lightning illuminating the garden in a snapshot of stark white reality. In that frozen instant, Yingtai saw Shanbo's face turn to hers, his expression a tumult of fear, hope, and desperate sincerity. The moment hung, suspended between heaven and earth. Then the world returned to the roar of the rain. The spell broke. Shanbo, seeming to realize the intensity of his own outburst, took a step back. "We should go in. You will catch a worse chill." They walked back through the sheeting rain, not touching, the space between them now filled not with formal distance, but with the echoing aftershock of a truth that had been uttered but not fully understood. That night, in her cold, solitary cell, Yingtai's cough returned with a vengeance, each racking spasm feeling like a physical manifestation of the impossible chasm between her promise and her reality. That night, in her cold, solitary cell, Yingtai's cough returned with a vengeance, each racking spasm feeling like a physical manifestation of the impossible chasm between her promise and her reality. The unseen river of her true self raged against its impossible banks, seeking a course that did not exist. And Shanbo, in his cell, stared at the ceiling, his heart full of a nameless, directionless longing, a vow made in a storm that he would cling to like a lifeline in the calm, confusing days to come. The Messenger from Shangyu. Summer draped itself over Wansong Academy, heavy and languid. The air in the lecture halls grew thick with heat and the scent of sweating boys and drying ink. Cicadas sawed their relentless song from the pine boughs, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones. The students traded their spring robes for lighter hemp, and the rhythm of life slowed to a somnolent crawl. For Ying Tai, the season was a crucible. The cough that had taken root during the spring storm lingered, a dry, persistent hack that stole her breath and left her ribs aching. The heat made the chest bindings a torture device, a sweat-sodden prison of linen that chafed her skin and seemed to compress her very spirit. She ate little, her appetite vanished, and the hollows beneath her cheekbones grew more pronounced. She moved through the days in a haze of fatigue and feverish determination, clinging to her studies as the last solid ground in a dissolving world. Shanbo watched her decline with mounting, helpless alarm. The careful distance he maintained now felt like a form of cruelty. He tried to bridge the gap with small, silent offerings. A fan placed on her desk when she wasn't looking. A cup of cool tea infused with chrysanthemum left by her cell door. A particularly brilliant firefly captured in a paper lantern to light her gloomy room. These gestures were like messages in a bottle, cast across the widening sea of her silence. One sweltering afternoon, as the students dozed over texts in the drowsy post-lunch hour, a stranger arrived at the academy gates. He was a man in his prime, dressed not in scholar's blue, but in the sturdy, travel-stained clothes of a household retainer. His face was weathered, his bearing erect. He carried a sealed letter and a small cloth-wrapped parcel. He asked for Zhu Zhulong. The gatekeeper sent a junior student to fetch her. Ying Tai, her heart a sudden, frantic bird in her chest, followed the boy to the gatehouse. When she saw the man, her blood ran cold despite the heat. It was Lao Chen, her father's most trusted and discreet servant. His eyes, sharp and knowing, swept over her, over the coarse robes, the short, uneven hair, the pallid, thin face. A flicker of profound pity, quickly masked, passed through his gaze. "Master Zhulong," he said, bowing with perfect formality, his voice neutral. "I bring word from your esteemed family in Shangyu." He handed her the letter. The seal was her father's, a lump of crimson wax imprinted with the Zhu family crest, a silkworm moth encircling a mulberry leaf. The very sight of it felt like a brand against her palm. "Thank you, uncle," she managed, her voice a dry rustle. "You have traveled far. Please take refreshment in the visitors' quarters." Lao Chen bowed again. "I will await your reply, young master." His emphasis on the title was subtle, but to Ying Tai it sounded like the tolling of a bell. She retreated to the one place she felt she could breathe, the walled cassia garden. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was in her father's hand, the characters bold, commanding, and utterly final. "To our son, Zhu Zhulong. Your time of wandering study must now conclude. The family requires your presence. An arrangement of great fortune and honor has been secured for your sister Ying Tai. She is to be wed to Ma Wensai of Hangzhou, son of the prefectural administrator Ma. The union will bind our family to powerful allies and ensure our prosperity for generations. Your sister's temperament is willful. Your influence as her brother is needed to prepare her mind for this duty, to guide her acceptance. You are to return home without delay, to assist in the bridal preparations, and to represent the Zhu family in the final negotiations. Your own scholarly pursuits can be resumed after this vital family matter is settled. A servant awaits you. Do not dishonor us with delay or question. Your father, Zhu Hong. The world tilted. The lush green of the garden swam before her, melting into a nauseating blur. Ma Wensai. The name was a curse, a cosmic joke of the most vicious kind. The bully, the rumor-monger, the embodiment of everything coarse and privileged she despised, he was to be her husband. Her father had sold her like a bolt of finest silk to the highest bidder for political advantage. And she, Zhu Julong, was commanded to return and coax her own self into the slaughter. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her, turning into a racking cough that bent her double. When she straightened, gasping, she saw Shanbo standing at the garden entrance. He had seen Lao Chen, had seen her distress, and had broken his own rule of distance to follow her. "Julong, what is it? What's wrong?" The concern in his voice undid her. She thrust the letter at him, unable to speak. He took it, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he read. She watched his face, saw the confusion first, then the dawning horror. "Your sister? Ma Wensai? That incept?" he breathed, his voice thick with disgust. But you must go to her. You must help her, Julong. A spirit like hers, married to such a man, it would be a living death." His empathy was immediate and total, directed at the fictional sister. The irony was a blade twisting in her soul. "I cannot," she whispered, the words torn from her. "I cannot go back and prepare her for that." "You must," Shanbo insisted, gripping her shoulders, his touch electric through the thin hemp. "She is your family. She needs you now, more than ever. You speak of her brilliance, her spirit. You cannot let it be extinguished in the household of that toad." He was pleading for her, for her. The sheer tragic poetry of it unlocked a floodgate. Ying Tai looked up into his face, so close, so full of honest brotherly anguish for her plight. The weight of the deception, the fear, the illness, the looming horror of the marriage, it all coalesced into a moment of reckless, desperate clarity. She had to give him something, a piece of the truth, a clue he could follow if his heart was true. "Shanbo," she said, her voice gaining a strange, resonant strength. "If I go, when I go, promise me you will not forget our talks, our debates under the cassia tree, our vow in the rain." "Forget? I could never." "Listen," she interrupted, her gaze holding his with an intensity that silenced him. "My sister, Ying Tai, she is not what you might imagine. She is not a delicate flower waiting to be arranged in a vase." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "When we were children, she would steal my books. She mastered the 4 books before I did. She writes poetry that would make Chancellor Wang weep. She argues philosophy like a seasoned scholar. Her mind, her mind is a twin to my own, to yours. It is a mind trapped in a silken cage. Shanbo stared, bewildered. You never spoke of her like this. Because it is a secret, Yingtai pressed, each word a risk, a dangerous secret. She is me, Shanbo, in spirit, in thought. If you wish to know her heart, to understand what this marriage will destroy, remember our conversations, every one of them. The words I have spoken to you here at Wansong are her words. The thoughts are her thoughts. She is Zhu Zhulong, and Zhu Zhulong is her. She saw the confusion deepen in his eyes. He was taking her words metaphorically, a brother's profound admiration for a sibling's intellect. He did not, could not make the literal leap. You give her too much credit, my friend, Shanbo said gently, trying to soothe her obvious distress. But I understand. You share a special bond. I promise you, I will remember everything. And when you have seen her settled, he faltered, unable to lie. When you have done your duty, you will return to Wansong. We will continue our studies together. It was no use. The chasm was too wide. The hope in his voice, the belief in a simple future where he would get his friend back and the sister would be settled, was a tragedy in itself. Yingtai's shoulders slumped. The feverish energy left her. I must go and speak to the Chancellor, to make arrangements. Let me come with you, Shanbo said instantly. No. The refusal was too sharp. She softened it. This is a family matter. It must be discreet. Please, Shanbo, just remember. She left him standing in the garden, holding the damning letter, his face a portrait of loyal concern. As she walked the familiar paths to the Chancellor's study, her feet felt like blocks of wood. Each step was a step closer to the end of Zhu Zhulong, a step back toward Zhu Yingtai's gilded tomb. She had planted a seed in Shanbo's mind, a cryptic, fragile seed. Whether it would lie dormant or one day crack open to reveal the shocking truth, she could not know. The only certainty was the closing of the academy gates behind her, and the long, silent journey back to the beginning of her end. The parting of the road. The interview with Chancellor Wang was a study in austere finality. The old scholar received her in his book-lined study, the air stale with the smell of aged paper and sandalwood. A single beam of afternoon sun, thick with swirling dust motes, cut across the space, a luminous, indifferent barrier. Yingtai, as Zhu Zhulong, knelt before his desk and presented her father's letter. Chancellor Wang read it slowly, his expression unchanging, a mask carved from old ivory. When he finished, he placed the parchment down with meticulous care, aligning its edges with the corner of his desk. Family duty is the first duty, he intoned, his voice devoid of inflection. It is the root from which all other virtues grow. A scholar without filial piety is a tree without roots. However tall it may seem, the first storm will topple it. I understand, Chancellor, whispered Yingtai, her head bowed, studying the intricate grain of the floorboards. This unworthy student is grateful for the instruction he has received here. Your performance has been unusual, Chancellor Wang said after a long pause. You think in parallels and echoes, not in straight lines. It is a quality that could lead to great insight or great confusion. His black eyes rested on her. This matter with your sister, it is a common story. Talent, spirit, these are often casualties in the alliances of great houses. You go to be a comfort. Remember that. Reason and gentle persuasion are stronger weapons than despair. He was advising Zhu Zhulong on how to manage his sister. The profound, layered irony of the situation threatened to choke her. She could only nod, pressing her forehead to the cool wood in a final kowtow. You may depart at dawn. Your place here will be held until the autumn season. If your family duties conclude, you may return. It was a formality. They both knew the likelihood was vanishingly small. Thank you, Chancellor. She left his study, the heavy wooden door closing behind her with a soft, definitive thud that echoed in the hollow of her chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of numb formalities. She informed Scholar Master Li, who patted her shoulder awkwardly and told her to drink more ginger tea for her cough. She packed her meager belongings, the few scrolls, the worn brush, the empty inkstone, the jade lotus pendant. She folded the coarse blue student robes, her fingers lingering on the rough texture that had come to mean freedom, and placed them in the bottom of her bag. As twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and somber oranges, she found herself drawn once more to the third courtyard. She stood in the doorway of the lecture hall, empty now, the long desks shadows in the gloom. Here she had sat next to Shanbo, their shoulders almost touching, their minds alight. The memory was a physical ache. A soft footfall made her turn. Shanbo stood there, his face pale in the dim light. He held a small cloth-wrapped bundle. I could not let you leave without a proper farewell, he said, his voice husky. They walked in silence to their cassia tree. The first stars were pricking through the deep blue vault. The air was warm, fragrant with pine and night-blooming jasmine from a nearby trellis. Here, Shanbo said, handing her the bundle. It's not much. She unwrapped it. Inside was a small, smooth riverstone, dark gray with a single white vein running through it like a lightning bolt. Beside it lay a new inkstick, finely crafted, its surface stamped with a design of two geese flying in formation. The stone is from the Qiantang riverbank, he explained, his words coming in a rush. I found it the day we went to see the boar tide. It reminded me of you, solid but with a hidden streak of fire. And the ink, well, a scholar must write. He attempted a smile that did not reach his eyes. Write to me, Julang. Tell me of your sister. Tell me of Shanggu. Tell me you are well. Yingtai clutched the gifts, the stone cool and permanent in her palm. I will treasure these, she said, her throat tight. And I will write. But you must promise me something in return. Anything. Continue your studies. Become the brilliant scholar you are meant to be. Do not let my absence be a shadow on your path. And she hesitated, gathering every ounce of her courage. If the path ever brings you to Shangyu, seek out the Zhu family. Not for my sake, but ask to see the gardens. They are said to be very beautiful in autumn. It was the clearest clue she dared to give, a specific, open invitation to a place and a time. Shangyu, Shanbo repeated, committing it to memory. I will, I swear it. After the autumn exams, perhaps, I will find a way. They stood there, the unsaid things swelling between them like a third presence. The breeze rustled the leaves of the cassia tree, a sound like gentle sighs. Ying-tai could feel the seconds draining away, each one a precious, irreplaceable drop of life. Do you remember, Shanbo began, his gaze fixed on the distant, darkening hills, the debate we had about Zhuangzi's butterfly, whether the philosopher dreamed the butterfly or the butterfly dreamed the philosopher? I remember, Ying-tai whispered. I am living it, she thought. I think now, Shanbo continued, his voice thick with emotion, that it does not matter. The dream was real to the dreamer. The feeling was real. This, he gestured between them, at the air humming with unspoken truth. This is real. Whatever it is, wherever you go, that cannot be undone by distance. It was the closest he had ever come to naming the unnamed. Ying-tai felt a crack splinter through the wall of her resolve. Before she could think, she reached out and took his hand. It was the first truly deliberate, prolonged touch she had ever allowed. His fingers were long, warm, slightly calloused from writing. A scholar's hand. A shock ran through her, a current of pure, agonizing connection. Shanbo, she breathed, her voice breaking. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear or what you see, remember the dream, remember the feeling. He stared at their joined hands, a confusion of wonder and sorrow on his face. His grip tightened. Always. The moment stretched, fragile and immense. Then, from the direction of the visitors' quarters, Lao Chen's discreet cough punctured the night. The servant was waiting. The real world, with its brutal demands, reasserted itself. Ying-tai pulled her hand away, the loss of his touch immediate and cold. I must go. He nodded, unable to speak. She saw the glint of unshed tears in his eyes behind his spectacles. She turned and walked away, each step a deliberate act of will, moving from the starlit garden into the deep shadow of the corridor. She did not look back. She could not. If she saw his face one more time, she would shatter. Lao Chen fell into step beside her, a silent, grim escort. They collected her bag and walked through the sleeping academy. At the great main gate, she paused. The world beyond was a pool of darkness. The road back to Shangyu, to Zhu Ying-tai, to Ma Wen-sai, lay there. She took one last, long breath of the pine-scented air of Wansong. It was the air of Zhu Jilung's life, a life that ended tonight. Then, squaring her slender shoulders under the weight of the lie and the love she carried, she stepped across the threshold. The gate closed behind her with a soft, final click, severing her from the only happiness she had ever truly known. The long road home was a road into a narrowing tunnel, and at its end waited not a welcome, but a wedding altar. The return to the gilded cage. The journey back to Shangyu was a mirror image of the departure, but inverted, like a painting viewed in dark water. The same road, the same merchant cart. Guo the merchant was returning home with empty sacks, but the spirit within the traveler was a broken thing. Yingtai, once buoyant with terrified hope, now sat hunched, a hollowed-out vessel filled with ashes of despair. The cough that had haunted her at Wansong grew worse, rattling in her chest with every jolt of the cart. She ignored Guo's concerned glances, staring at the passing landscape with unseeing eyes. The world outside was lush with high summer. Rice paddies stretched in shimmering green carpets, water buffalo wallowed in muddy pools, and lotus flowers bloomed in defiant pink splendor in every pond. The beauty felt like a mockery. Each mile closer to Shangyu was a mile further from Shanbo, a mile deeper into the trap. Lao Chen, riding silently beside the cart on a hired mule, was a monument to taciturn loyalty. He ensured she ate, handed her a water skin, and said nothing. His presence was a constant reminder that this was not an escape, but a repatriation under guard. 3 days later, the familiar silhouette of the Zhu estate walls rose against the late afternoon sky. The weeping willows along the riverbank seemed to droop lower, like mourners at a grave. As the cart approached the servants' gate, she could not arrive at the main entrance. Zhu Julong, a profound metamorphosis had to occur. In a copse of bamboo a half-li from the estate, she changed. With Lao Chen standing watch, she shed the coarse hemp trousers and tunic, the uniform of her fleeting freedom. From a bag Lao Chen carried, she drew out a set of women's undergarments and a simple, unadorned traveling dress of pale green silk. The bindings came off last. As she unwound the long, sweat-stained strips of linen, she gasped. The skin beneath was chafed raw, marked with angry red lines and fading bruises. The act of freeing her constricted ribs made her dizzy. Her body, forced into a masculine frame for so long, seemed to sigh and settle into its true shape with a pang of painful relief. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she had removed not just cloth, but a layer of her soul. She bundled the boy's clothes and handed them to Lao Chen. "Burn them," she whispered. He took the bundle, his face impassive, and gave a single nod. Then she stepped from behind the bamboo screen. Zhu Julong was gone. Zhu Yingtai stood there, her figure slender in the soft silk, her cropped hair now a shocking, boyish frame for her delicate, exhausted features. She looked like a phantom of herself. Lao Chen's eyes widened a fraction, the only betrayal of his shock. "Miss," he said, the title heavy with finality. They entered through the servants' gate, slipping into the labyrinth of back corridors and storage courtyards. The house was a symphony of familiar, oppressive sounds. The clatter of pans from the kitchen, the distant murmur of her mother's voice, the rhythmic sweep of a broom on flagstones. The scent was of home, incense, aged wood, simmering broth, and it filled her with a claustrophobic dread. Xing Xin was waiting in her old chamber. The maid took one look at her mistress, at the short hair and the fever-bright eyes, and her hands flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. Without a word, she rushed forward and embraced Yingtai, holding her as she trembled. "Oh, miss, your beautiful hair, you're so thin." "It is done," Xing Xin murmured into her shoulder, her voice devoid of emotion. Zhu Julong lived, Now he is dead. The reunion with her parents that evening was a formal, frosty pageant. She knelt in the main hall, the polished wood floor cold against her knees. Her father, Zhu Hong, sat stiffly in his carved chair, his face a mask of stern displeasure and thinly veiled triumph. Her mother stood beside him, her eyes red-rimmed, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief into a knot. "You look like a beggar," her father stated, his voice cutting the silence. "Your hair is an outrage. Your behavior has brought shame upon this house." Ying Tai kept her head bowed. This unfilial daughter begs her father's forgiveness. The words were rote, ashes on her tongue. "Your willfulness ends now," he continued, ignoring her apology. "The Ma family alliance is set. The betrothal gifts are lavish. Administrator Ma's son, Wencai, is a rising star in the prefectural government. You will be the wife of an official. You will bring honor, not scandal." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "The boy you pretended to be, that fantasy is over. You will not speak of it, read of it, or think of it. You are Zhu Ying Tai. You will prepare to become Ma Ying Tai. Do you understand?" "I understand, father." Her mother rushed forward then, unable to bear the tension any longer. She gathered Ying Tai into her arms, weeping. "My child, my poor child. We were so worried. You are home now, home. We will make you well. We will make you beautiful for your wedding." Her mother's embrace was suffocating, a silken prison of misplaced love. Over her mother's shoulder, Ying Tai saw her father's unyielding expression. There would be no reprieve. The days that followed were a relentless process of re-confinement. Physicians came, prescribing bitter tonics for her cough and weakness. Seamstresses swarmed her chamber, measuring every inch of her for the wedding trousseau. Bolts of fabric more magnificent than any she had ever seen filled the room. Crimson brocades woven with gold phoenixes, azure silks embroidered with silver clouds, delicate gauzes meant for her wedding night. The weight and opulence of the materials felt like chains. Her hair became a project. Her mother applied nightly poultices of ginger and sesame oil, praying for it to grow faster. In the meantime, skilled maids devised elaborate hairpieces and wigs, intertwined with jewels and fresh flowers to disguise the short crop. Each morning, Ying Tai sat for hours as they painted her face with white powder and rouge, kohled her eyes, and stained her lips. They turned her into an exquisite doll, a perfect, silent ornament. The reflection in the bronze mirror was a stranger, a lovely, lifeless mask. The only spark of her former self emerged in secret at night. By the light of a single shielded candle, with Shin Shin keeping watch at the door, she wrote. She wrote to Shanbo, not us Yingtai, but us Julang. She described the journey home, the sisters' deep melancholy, the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. She wrote of philosophy, of memories of their debates, of the cassia tree. She poured her true self into the brushstrokes, her heart bleeding onto the paper. She could not send the letters, there was no way. But writing them was the only act that kept Zhu Zhulang, and therefore her own soul, from complete annihilation. One afternoon, a week after her return, a different visitor was announced. Administrator Ma himself had come with his son to finalize the contract and to pay respects. Yingtai was paraded before them in the main hall, a living exhibit. She knelt, performed the rituals, kept her eyes demurely lowered. Through her lashes, she saw Ma Wenkai. He was taller, more filled out than he had been at the academy, his face handsome in a coarse, self-satisfied way. He wore rich silks and a smug expression. When their eyes met for a fleeting second, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a slow, puzzled frown. He was trying to place her, this delicate bride, with someone from his past. Her father spoke loudly, drawing attention. "My daughter has been unwell and much secluded. She is modest and dutiful." "A virtuous bride is a treasure," Administrator Ma boomed, his gaze appraising her like a piece of fine horseflesh. Ma Wenkai leaned towards his father and whispered something. The administrator's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. "Nonsense, boy! A trick of the light. The scholar Zhu was a slight, clever youth. This is a flower. You are fortunate." But the seed of doubt was planted. Yingtai felt a new kind of cold dread seep into her bones. Ma Wenkai's eyes lingered on her with a new, speculative intensity. The gilded cage now had a new, more dangerous keeper, one whose memory might yet prove to be the thread that unraveled everything. The walls were not just closing in, they were becoming a hall of mirrors where her past and her present threatened to collide with catastrophic force. The cocoon of silk and sorrow. Autumn arrived in Shangyu not with a blaze of color, but with a slow, melancholic fade. The green of the willows along the river yellowed at the edges. The air lost its humid heaviness, acquiring a crisp, cutting clarity that made Yingtai's persistent cough tighten its grip on her lungs. The Zhu estate became a hive of frenetic activity, a beautiful machine dedicated to packaging its daughter for transfer. Yingtai's world shrank to the dimensions of her chamber and the adjacent women's quarters. Her existence became a curriculum of wifely arts, a cruel parody of the scholarly pursuits she had mastered at one song. Instead of the Analects, she was force-fed the admonitions for women. Instead of debating statecraft, she practiced the precise number of steps, the angle of a bow, the correct tone of voice for addressing a mother-in-law. The lessons were administered by a severe matron hired by the Ma family, a woman with a mouth like a pursed purse and eyes that missed nothing. "A woman's virtue is her silence," the matron intoned, her rod tapping a rhythm on the floor. "Her thoughts are to be of her husband's comfort, her family's harmony. Her eyes should see no further than the courtyard gate. Your previous indulgences are a sickness we must purge." The purge involved long hours of embroidery. Yingtai's fingers, skilled with a brush, were now forced to guide a needle through layers of silk, creating elaborate patterns of mandarin ducks and double happiness symbols for her wedding bedding. Each stitch felt like a suture closing her own spirit. The vibrant threads, crimson, gold, emerald, were garish to her eyes, which longed for the subtle blacks and grays of ink on paper. Her only solace remained the night, when the household slept and the only sound was the mournful hoot of an owl in the distant woods. She would creep from her bed. By the faint moonlight filtering through the lattice, or the guttering flame of a stolen candle, she would take out the river stone Shanbo had given her. She would hold its cool, solid wake in her palm, tracing the white lightning bolt with her thumb. Then she would unroll a small piece of precious paper and write. These were not letters anymore, but fragments of a testament, poems that poured from a well of despair, so deep it had passed beyond tears. The loom of day weaves cloth of gold, a shroud for stories left untold. The needle flies, the thread is spun, to mend a life that's come undone. And another, the cassia tree, does it still stand in that far-off, scholarly land? Its branches bear in autumn's chill a mirror to my frozen will. She signed none of them. She hid them in a hollow space behind a loose brick in the wall near her bed, a tiny tomb for her unmourned self. Her physical health continued to decline. The rich medicinal broths meant to fortify her turned her stomach. The powders and paints on her face seemed to leach the vitality from her skin, leaving her pale despite the rouge. She moved through her days with a ghostly languor, a compliant doll. Her mother watched her with growing, helpless anxiety, fussing over her with silken shawls and jeweled hairpins, as if adornment could cure a dying soul. One evening, a commotion at the front gate broke the household's tense routine. A messenger in the livery of the Hangzhou prefectural office had arrived, not with a gift, but with a sealed communiqué for Zhu Heng. Ying Tai, sitting with her mother in the inner courtyard pretending to admire the last chrysanthemums, saw her father receive it. His face, as he read, underwent a subtle transformation. A flicker of unease quickly smoothed into bland courtesy as he dismissed the messenger. Later, after the evening meal, he summoned her to his private study. The room smelled of old paper and the sharp, astringent scent of his favorite tea. He did not ask her to sit. "A curious report from Hangzhou," he began, his voice deceptively calm. He picked up a letter opener, a slender piece of jade shaped like a sword, and toyed with it. "Administrator Ma's son, your betrothed, has been making inquiries at the One Song Academy." Ying Tai's heart stopped, then began a frantic, painful pounding against her bruised ribs. "It seems," her father continued, his eyes like chips of flint, "that he is troubled by a resemblance between you and a fellow student he knew there, a boy named Zhu Julong." He paused, letting the name hang in the air, toxic and undeniable. He finds it an amusing coincidence. A brother and sister who bear such a striking likeness. He mentioned this boy was frail, clever, and had a particular cough. He is a perceptive young man. The room seemed to tilt. Ying Tai gripped the edge of a bookshelf to steady herself. The silence stretched, thin and deadly. "What a remarkable coincidence indeed," his father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A brother who vanished from the academy just as a sister reappears at home. A brother whose scholarly prowess was noted, just as a sister's willful intellect is bemoaned." He placed the jade letter opener down with a precise click. If this perception were to solidify into a certainty, the Ma family would not be merely insulted, they would be enraged. Our alliance would become a scandal that would bury us. Your value would become less than zero. You would bring not honor, but utter ruin. He walked around the desk to stand before her. She could smell the tea on his breath. So, you will eradicate this perception. You will be the perfect, ignorant, delicate bride. You will assure young Master Ma with every breath, every glance, that you are nothing but what you seem, that your brother is a quiet scholar, and you are a simple woman. You will become that woman. Do you understand the cost of failure? It will not be you alone who pays it. Xingxin, your mother's standing, the entire Zhu lineage. I will see to it. It was not a threat of violence, but of systemic annihilation. He would dismantle every person she loved, every thread of her world, to protect the family's name and the alliance. The gilded cage was now lined with blades. "I understand, Father," she whispered, her voice a dry leaf in the wind. "Good. The wedding date is set. 1 month from today. Use the time to convince him, to convince everyone, especially yourself." She left the study, walking back through the dim corridors like a sleepwalker. When she reached her chamber, she found Xinxin waiting, her face etched with worry. Without a word, Yingtai went to the loose brick, pulled out the hidden poems, and carried them to the bronze brazier where a low fire glowed. One by one, she fed them to the flames. The paper curled, blackened, the beautiful, desperate characters dissolving into ephemeral smoke and weightless ash. She watched the last fragment, a line that read, "Oh, that my spirit were a bird to fly to him on wounded wing," vanish. It was the funeral of Zhu Julong, the final, necessary death. The cocoon of silk and sorrow was now complete, seamless, and inescapable. The only path left was to play her role until the end, to become the empty vessel her family and her future husband required. The butterfly of her brief, glorious freedom had been caught, pinned, and was now displayed for a transaction. The vibrant, intellectual world of Wan's song, the sound of Shanbo's laughter, the feel of a book in her hands, all of it receded into the distance, becoming not a memory, but a dream from another, impossible life. The ghost at the banquet. The final month compressed time into a suffocating vice. Each dawn brought the wedding day closer. A grim sunrise on a horizon Yingtai could not bear to see. She enacted her father's command with a robotic precision that was more convincing than any performance. She became the echo of a proper maiden. Her laughter, when required, was a soft, hollow tinkle. Her speech was limited to pleasantries about the weather or gratitude for gifts. She feigned a delicate ignorance when any topic beyond household management arose. The fierce light in her eyes, which Shanbo had so admired, was meticulously extinguished, replaced by a docile, downward gaze. Her physical decline, however, was beyond her control. The cough became a constant, racking companion, a thief that stole her breath and left her weak and trembling. The family physician prescribed stronger draughts of opium and licorice root, which clouded her mind into a hazy submission, further aiding her charade of passivity. The Ma family visited twice more. Each visit was an ordeal. Ying Tai would be presented in the main hall, a living ornament amidst vases of forced peonies and trays of sweetmeats. Ma Wenkai watched her with the intensity of a cat at a mouse hole. He would steer conversation, testing her. "I hear the autumn views from the southern pavilion are exceptional, Miss Zhu. Do you enjoy landscape poetry?" She would keep her eyes lowered. "This humble girl knows little of poetry, Master Ma. I am told the chrysanthemums are particularly fine this year." Or, "My studies at Wansong Academy were challenging. The chancellor is a severe taskmaster. Your brother must have found it so." A flicker behind her eyes, instantly suppressed. "My brother writes that the scholarship is deep. He is a diligent student." Her voice a monotone. Ma Wenkai's scrutiny would linger, a mix of frustration and lingering doubt. He could find no crack in her facade, only the bland, impenetrable surface of a sheltered girl. Yet the ghost of Zhu Jilong haunted him. The slight build, the intelligent eyes, that damned cough. The resemblance was a splinter in his mind he could not dislodge. The pre-wedding banquet, held 1 week before the ceremony, was the grandest event the Zhu estate had hosted in a generation. It was a statement of wealth and alliance. Lanterns turned night into day in the main courtyards. The air grew thick with the smells of roasted suckling pig, braised abalone, and 100 delicate spices. The sound was a roar of conversation, clinking cups, and the plaintive melodies of a gu zeng played by musicians hidden behind a screen. Ying Tai was the silent centerpiece. She was dressed in a gown of breathtaking opulence, layers of crimson silk embroidered with phoenixes whose tails were threaded with real gold, their eyes tiny sapphires. A headdress of gold filigree and pearls weighed heavily upon her brow, its dangling ornaments tinkling with her every slight movement. The makeup transformed her into a porcelain idol, beautiful and utterly lifeless. She was led from the women's quarters to be presented to the assembled male guests, a tradition both an honor and a humiliation. She stood on a slightly raised dais at the head of the hall, her mother and the stern matron flanking her. Her eyes, glazed from the medicinal draught, swept over the sea of faces. Local gentry, officials, Ma family relatives. Their expressions were a blur of appraisal, envy, and congratulatory smiles. She felt like a prize mare at auction. Then her gaze snagged on a figure standing near the back, partially obscured by a pillar. It was a young man in travel-stained blue robes, not the fine silks of a guest, but the simple, worn cotton of a scholar. He was thinner than she remembered, his face drawn with fatigue and a desperate hope. He had removed his spectacles and was polishing them furiously on his sleeve, as if trying to clear not just the lenses, but the reality before him. Liang Shanbo. The world dropped away. The roar of the banquet muted to a distant hum. The lantern light seemed to focus into a single, searing beam upon him. He had come. He had kept his promise. He had found his way to Shangyu, to the Zhu family gardens in autumn. But he had not come to see gardens. He had come at the invitation of the Ma family. Administrator Ma, in a display of paternal pride, had invited a few promising scholars from Wansong to witness his son's glorious union. Shanbo, upon hearing the name Zhu, had begged, bribed, and burned through his small savings to be among them. Their eyes met across the crowded, fragrant, noisy hall. In that instant, Ying Tai's meticulously constructed facade shattered. The docile mask slipped. Her breath hitched, not from the cough, but from a surge of emotion so powerful it was a physical blow. Shock, terror, a wild, impossible joy, and a bottomless despair collided within her. Her hands, clasped before her, began to tremble violently, causing the pearls on her sleeves to shiver and click. Shanbo's face underwent a transformation of pure, uncomprehending agony. He stared at the resplendent bride. He saw the familiar set of the eyes, the line of the jaw beneath the paint, the slight, frail frame. He saw the ghost of his dearest friend superimposed upon this exquisite alien woman. His mind, brilliant with abstract philosophy, fought against the concrete, impossible truth. Zhu Long? His lips formed the name, soundless. Ma Wenchai, standing proudly near his father, followed Ying Tai's frozen gaze. He saw the recognition in her eyes, the tremor in her form. He saw the stunned, devastated scholar at the back of the hall. And in a flash, the splinter in his mind became a piercing, lucid certainty. The rumor, the resemblance, the cough, it was not a coincidence. It was a monstrous deception. The Zhu family was trying to pawn off a disguised, unnatural creature, us as a pure bride. A cold, triumphant fury settled over Ma Wenchai's features. He did not cause a scene. Not yet. The public humiliation would be more exquisite later. He simply leaned over and whispered something to his father. Administrator Ma's jovial face hardened, his eyes turning to flint as they swept from Ying Tai to Shanbo and back to Zhu Hong. Ying Tai's mother, feeling her daughter sway, gripped her elbow tightly. "My child, what is it? You are pale." The matron pinched her arm, a sharp, hidden reminder. Eyes down. Ying Tai wrenched her gaze from Shanbo, forcing it to the floor. The banquet hall swam back into focus, but now it was a chamber of horrors. The music sounded like a dirge. The laughter was demonic. She had survived by becoming a ghost in her own life, and now the one person who gave that ghost meaning had appeared, only to witness her final surrender. And in witnessing, he had signed not only her death warrant, but perhaps his own. The presentation ended. She was led away, back to the inner quarters, each step a mechanical effort. Behind her, the banquet continued, but the undercurrent had shifted. Whispers slithered among the guests. Zhu Hong's face was a rigid mask of fury. Shanbo stood frozen by the pillar, the world he knew in ruins at his feet, the truth he had traveled so far to find, exploding in his face with the force of a thunderbolt. The ghost at the banquet had been seen, and, in being seen, had condemned them all. The shattered vow. The inner quarters of the Zhu estate, normally a realm of hushed feminine activity, became a fortress under siege after the banquet. Yingtai was confined to her chamber, the door guarded by two of her father's most taciturn servants. The lavish wedding silks hung in the room like mocking specters. The air was thick with the cloying scent of the fear that had replaced incense. Outside, in the men's world, a tempest of negotiation and threat raged. Zhu Hong's study was the eye of the storm. Administrator Ma, his face purple with rage, laid down his demands. A counterfeit bride? A girl who lived as a man, who polluted the sacred halls of scholarship with her presence. This is not a simple breach of contract, Zhu Hong. This is an abomination. The penalty for such fraud. There is no fraud, Zhu Hong interrupted, his voice a strained wire. My daughter was ill, secluded. This scholar you mentioned sees phantoms. My son Zhu Jirong is at one song. A letter of confirmation can be obtained. His bluff was desperate, thin as rice paper. Ma Wensai, standing beside his father, sneered. The scholar is Liang Shanbo. He shared a room with Shanbo for 3 years. He knows the boy's face, his cough, his mind. He is outside your gates right now, demanding to see her. Is that the action of a man who sees phantoms? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You have 2 choices. You can publicly admit the deceit, return the betrothal gifts 10-fold, and watch your family's name be dragged through the mud of every province. Or the wedding proceeds. Zhu Hong stared, uncomprehending. Proceeds? The alliance is too valuable to abandon over female eccentricity, Administrator Ma stated, his eyes calculating. The girl is still a Zhu. The connection is still made. But the terms change. Her dowry is doubled, and she comes to our house not as a first wife, but as a concubine. A silent, obedient concubine who will never show her face in polite society. This scandal dies here, in this room. The world will know only that the Zhu daughter was demoted due to a hidden, lingering illness. A tragedy, but not a scandal. The proposal was a masterstroke of cruel pragmatism. It salvaged the Ma family's investment and pride while annihilating Yingtai's future utterly. A concubine was a possession, a shadow with no rights, no voice, forever marked by disgrace. Zhu Hong's shoulders slumped. The fight left him. The preservation of the family's external honor, even at the cost of his daughter's soul, was the only calculus he understood. He gave a single, stiff nod. Outside the main gate, under a sky pregnant with unshed rain, Liang Shanbo was breaking apart. He had been denied entry, pushed back by Zhu family retainers. His travel-worn blue robe was spattered with mud from the scuffle. His spectacles sat askew on his nose. He was no longer the gentle scholar, but a raw nerve of grief and revelation. "Ying Tai!" he cried toward the high, blank walls, his voice cracking. "Zhu Jiu Long, please! I know it's you. I understand now. The gardens in autumn, the sister who was your twin in mind. It was you. It was always you." His words were swallowed by the indifferent bulk of the estate. A few villagers and servants lingering at a distance watched with pity and curiosity. The tragic, shouting scholar was becoming a local spectacle. Then, a small postern gate, used by kitchen staff, creaked open. Xingxian slipped out, her face streaked with tears. She rushed to Shanbo, thrusting a small, cloth-wrapped object into his hands. She whispered urgently, "She cannot come. They have locked her away. She is to be sent away as a concubine in 3 days. She told me to give you this. She said, to remember the dream." Before Shanbo could speak, Xingxian fled back inside, the gate bolting shut with a final sound. With trembling hands, Shanbo unwrapped the cloth. Inside was the river stone he had given Zhu Long, Yin Tai, at parting. Its white lightning bolt gleamed dully in the gray light. Wrapped around it was a single, tiny scroll of paper, no wider than a finger. He unrolled it. There, in the small, precise, heartbreakingly familiar calligraphy of Zhu Long, was a single line, a fragment of a poem they had once discussed. "The mountain's spirit withers, the jade grows cold." It was a quote from an ancient dirge, a confession and a farewell. It was her voice, her mind, reaching out to him from behind the walls. The last proof. The dam holding back Shanbo's shock and hope broke. This was not a mistake, not a phantom. The person he had loved as a brother, the mind he had cherished above all others, was imprisoned within those walls, being sold into a living death. And he had been blind. He had shared 1,000 hours with her and never seen. A cold, driving rain began to fall, soaking him to the skin instantly. He did not move. He stood rooted to the spot, the stone clutched in one fist, the tiny scroll in the other, the words of the dirge echoing in his skull. He had found his river's end, and it was a desolate, stagnant pond of betrayal and despair. His vow in the storm, to find a way like a river finds the sea, now felt like a childish fantasy. The societal forces arrayed against them were mountains, and he was a single eroding stream. The love he felt, now terrifyingly redefined, was a forbidden, impossible thing, with no name and no path. He thought of her laugh, her clever arguments, the way she would quietly fix his mistakes. He thought of her final, desperate plea in the garden to remember the dream. The dream was real, and it was a nightmare. A great, shuddering sob racked his frame, lost in the pounding of the rain. He had journeyed to Shangyu to find clarity, to solve the riddle of his friend's strange words. The answer he found was a truth more shattering than any mystery. The vow of eternal intellectual companionship was ash. The brotherhood was a beautiful lie. What remained was a love that could not speak its name, for a person who was about to vanish forever into the gilded prison of another man's house. her brilliant mind extinguished, her spirit broken. The rain matted his hair, streamed down his face, mingling with his tears. He turned his back on the zoo estate, the place of his heart's crucifixion, and stumbled blindly down the muddy road toward the wretched inn where he was staying. The world had lost all color, all meaning. The scholarly ambitions that had once burned so brightly were now cold cinders. The only thing that felt real was the cold, hard weight of the river stone in his palm, and the devastating knowledge that the other half of his soul was being buried alive. The Descent of the Scholar. The inn in Shangyu was a wretched place, little more than a stable with a loft for travelers too poor or too desperate for better. The air was thick with the smell of damp straw, mold, and the sour tang of cheap rice wine. Liang Shanbo returned to it a changed man, a specter of his former self. He moved like a machine wound too tight, his clothes plastered to his thin frame by the relentless rain, his eyes staring from a face that seemed to have aged a decade in a single afternoon. He paid no heed to the curious stares of the other lodgers, a pair of ox-cart drivers and a toothless old man mumbling to himself in a corner. He climbed the rickety ladder to his assigned space, a narrow pallet separated from the common area by a tattered reed screen. Here, in the gloom, he collapsed. The river stone fell from his numb fingers, rolling into a dusty corner. The tiny scroll, with its devastating line of poetry, remained clutched in his hand, the paper growing soft and pulpy from the moisture of his grip. He did not light the cheap tallow candle provided. He sat in the gathering darkness, the only light the sickly gray glow from a small high window streaked with rain. His mind, once a palace of orderly thought and elegant philosophy, became a prison of chaotic, lacerating images. They flashed behind his eyes with the violence of lightning strikes. Yingtai, Julong, laughing across a sun-dapple's desk, pushing his spectacles up his nose for him, her delicate hands mending his ink-stained sleeve, her voice low and earnest, debating the nature of benevolence under the cassia tree. The feel of her hand in his, that one fleeting moment in the storm-lashed garden at Wansong. The utter devastation on her painted, beautiful face in the banquet hall, the mask slipping, revealing the terrified, brilliant soul beneath. And then the other images. Ma Wen-kai's smug, cruel face, the towering, indifferent walls of the zoo estate, the word concubine hanging in the air like a death sentence. A new, violent cough tore through him, doubling him over. It was a sympathetic echo of her cough, the one he now knew was born of constriction and despair, not just weak lungs. When the fit subsided, he tasted copper. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and in the dim light saw a dark, wet smear. He stared at it without surprise, a distant part of him noting it as a fitting external manifestation of the internal hemorrhage. The fever began that night. It came upon him not with a slow burn, but with the suddenness of a forest fire. One moment he was shivering with cold and shock. The next, his skin was on fire, his thoughts scattering like panicked birds. The scholarly parables and classical alliances dissolved, replaced by raw animal anguish. "Ying Tai," he moaned into the straw-filled sack that served as a pillow. The name, her true name, felt both foreign and intimately right on his tongue. It was the key that unlocked the mystery of 3 years. Her every hesitation, her modesty, her fierce protectiveness, her cryptic words, all of it snapped into a heartbreaking, perfect clarity. He laughed, a dry, cracked sound that turned into another racking cough. He, Liang Shanbo, celebrated for his insight, had been blind. He had shared a room with a miracle, a woman of transcendent intellect and courage, and had seen only a clever, fragile boy. He had loved her with all the depth of his soul, and had not even known the nature of his own love. The fever visions intensified. He saw her dressed in the crimson wedding gown, but it was morphing into a funeral shroud. He saw Ma Wen-sai leading her away, her head bowed, and as she passed, she turned to Shanbo, and her face was the skull-like visage from the ancient dirge. The mountain spirit withers, the jade grows cold. "No!" he cried out, thrashing on the pallet. "No, I understand now. I see you, Ying Tai!" The ox cart drivers below muttered uneasily. The innkeeper's wife, a hard-faced woman with a permanent scowl, climbed up later with a bowl of watery gruel. She took one look at him, his fever-glazed eyes, the blood on his lips, the tremors racking his body, and set the bowl down with a clatter. "You're done for, scholar," she stated with a grim, practical fatalism. "Consumption got the death heat on you. You ain't dying in my loft. You need to go to the temple hospice or go home." Home. The word had no meaning. Home was a small, quiet house where he was supposed to return, a successful scholar, a credit to his poor family. Home was not a place that contained a world that had just been annihilated. Yet, a final, desperate instinct cut through the fever, a last duty. If he was dying, and the fiery pain in his chest, the taste of blood told him he was, he could not do it here, in this foul inn, his truth unknown. He had to get to her, not to save her, that was beyond his power, but to stand before her, once, us Liang Shanbo, who finally knew Zhu Yingtai, to offer not a solution, but an acknowledgement, to say her name. With a Herculean effort, fueled by delirium and desperation, he pushed himself upright. The world tilted and swam. He fumbled for his spectacles, hooked them over his ears. He found his threadbare bag, shoved the river stone and the dissolving scroll inside. He had no money left for a cart, for a horse. It didn't matter. He stumbled down the ladder, ignoring the calls of the innkeeper's wife. He pushed through the door and out into the late afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed in a cold, clear, cruel light. The road back to Hangzhou stretched before him, a ribbon of mud over 100 li long. He began to walk. He walked through the remains of the day, his body burning, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps that sparked fresh coughs. Villagers he passed on the road edged away from the wild-eyed, mumbling scholar staggering along like a drunkard. He drank from muddy puddles when his thirst became unbearable. He did not stop to eat. The very thought of food was repulsive. As night fell, the fever painted the world in monstrous shapes. The whispering reeds along the riverbank became accusing voices. The distant hoots of owls were the mournful cries of lost spirits. The cold stars above were the jewels in Yingtai's wedding headdress, mocking him. He walked through the night, driven by a single fixed purpose that was the last anchor of his sanity. Find Chancellor Wang. Tell him. Make him know who she was. Make someone in the world of men acknowledge her brilliance, her sacrifice. It was a pitiful ambition, but it was all he had left, to bear witness. By the second dawn, he was a ghost haunting the road. His blue robe was torn and caked with filth. His feet bled inside his straw sandals. The cough was a constant, tearing presence, each paroxysm leaving him weaker, bringing up more blood. The landscape began to blur into the familiar hills surrounding Hangzhou, but he no longer recognized them. He saw only the path to Wansong Academy, a steep, winding trail through the 10,000 pines that now seemed like a mountain to climb. He collapsed at the foot of the hill, at the edge of the city. A farmer found him, took pity, and loaded his shivering, insensible form onto a cart of turnips for the final leg. When the cart halted at the base of the academy path, the farmer shook him. "Scholar, is this the place?" Shinebo raised his head. Through the haze, he saw the dark timber gates at the top of the pine-lined path. They seemed to recede into an impossible distance. He mumbled his thanks, fell from the cart, and began to crawl. His hands scraped on the gravel. His knees tore on the stones. He crawled past the spot where he had first followed the blue robes. He crawled past the place where he and Jilong had once stopped to watch a woodpecker. He crawled, a broken, fevered creature, driven by the last ember of his will, toward the only place left that represented truth, the place where she had lived and breathed us her truest self. He did not reach the gates. His strength gave out halfway up the path. He rolled onto his back, gasping at the canopy of pine needles far above, weaving against the bright, indifferent sky. The clean, familiar scent of the trees filled his nostrils, the scent of their shared years. His hand fumbled in his bag, closed around the cold, smooth river stone. He brought it to his lips, a final, desperate kiss. "Yingtai," he whispered, the name a breath lost in the sigh of the 10,000 pines. "I found the sea." His eyes, behind the cracked, dirty lenses of his spectacles, remained open, fixed on the endless blue between the branches. The brilliant, gentle, loving mind of Liang Shanbo, who had solved the greatest riddle of his life, too late, extinguished there on the path to knowledge, a testament to a love that the world had no room for, and a truth it could not bear. The silent procession. News traveled through the scholarly networks of Hangzhou with a somber, efficient speed. A promising student of Wansong, Liang Shanbo, had been found deceased on the path to the academy. The official story, murmured with respectful pity, was of a sudden, violent consumption that had struck him down on his return journey from a family visit. The tragedy of a bright life cut short was lamented in lecture halls and tea houses. But within the close-knit circle of the third courtyard and in the chancellor's private chambers, a different, more terrible understanding took shape. The student who found Shanbo's body also found the river stone clutched in his hand and the remnants of a poetic fragment in his bag. The words, though water-stained, were recognizable in that distinctive, precise script that had so often complemented Shanbo's own sprawling essays. Scholar Master Li, his kindly face gray with shock, brought the items to Chancellor Wang. The old scholar held the cold stone and the fragile paper scrap in his wrinkled hands. He read the line, "The mountain spirit withers, the jade grows cold." He closed his eyes, and for a long minute the only sound in the room was the hiss of the charcoal in the brazier. "A double tragedy," Chancellor Wang said at last, his voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "Two brilliant minds, one extinguished by illness, the other entombed by custom." He opened his eyes, and they held a profound, weary sorrow. "Prepare the funeral rites for Lang Shanbo, simple but respectful. He was a true scholar." The funeral was a quiet, rain-soaked affair held in a small temple near the academy. A handful of classmates attended, their faces young and solemn beneath oiled paper umbrellas. Shanbo's impoverished family, a stooped father and a weeping mother, had made the arduous journey. They stood bewildered and broken, unable to comprehend how their son, who had left full of vibrant promise, had returned to them a lifeless body in a plain wooden coffin. As the monks chanted the sutras for the dead, Scholar Master Li approached the grieving parents. He spoke not of consumption, but of their son's extraordinary mind, his gentle nature, his unique friendship with another remarkable student named Zhu Julong. He pressed a small purse of silver, a collection from the academy, into the father's calloused hand. "For his memory," Li said softly. The father, tears cutting paths through the grime on his weathered face, could only nod. The mother clutched a bundle containing Shanbo's few possessions, his spectacles, his last unfinished essay, and the dark gray river stone with the white lightning bolt, which Scholar Master Li had quietly returned to them. "He held this at the end," Li explained. "It seemed important to him." The coffin was carried to a burial plot on a hillside overlooking the Cheongtong River. The site was chosen for its view of the water Shanbo had loved to ponder. As the first shovelfuls of wet earth thudded upon the wood, the rain fell harder, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the senseless waste. Back at the Zhu estate in Shangyu, Ying Tai knew nothing of this. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of her chamber, and the relentless, silent preparation for her new life as a concubine. The lavish wedding was cancelled. In its place was a grim, functional transaction. She was to be transported to the Ma household in a simple, closed sedan chair at dusk, with no fanfare, no music, no celebration. Her bridal silks were put away. She was given a set of plain, dark blue robes suitable for a woman of low status. On the morning of what was to have been her wedding day, Xin entered with her breakfast congee. The maid's eyes were swollen, her movements listless. She placed the bowl down and, instead of leaving, she knelt beside Ying Tai's seat at the dressing table. "Miss," Xin whispered, her voice raw, "there is a rumor among the servants who went to market." Ying Tai stared at her own reflection, at the short hair now growing out in awkward tufts, at the face devoid of paint, pale as moonstone. She said nothing. "They say a scholar from Hanzhou, from Wansong. He died on the road. His name was Liang." The words did not register at first. They floated in the stagnant air of the room, meaningless sounds. Then, slowly, they coalesced. Scholar, Wansong, Liang. They formed a shape, a name, that pierced the numb shell surrounding her heart. A strange calm descended upon Ying Tai. It was not the calm of peace, but the absolute stillness that resides at the eye of a typhoon. The frantic fear, the agonizing hope, the desperate sorrow, all of it ceased. A terrible, crystalline clarity took its place. "How?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "A fever, they say, a sickness of the lungs. He was returning to the academy." Returning. He had left Shangyu. He had turned his back and started the journey back to the world they had shared. And the world had killed him. Her father's threats, Ma Wenkai's malice, the weight of the secret, the impossibility of it all, it had broken him. Her brilliant, gentle, beautiful Shanbo was gone. The other half of the dream was extinguished. She did not cry. She felt as if her tear ducts had turned to dust. She simply stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the gray, indifferent sky. The chrysanthemums in the courtyard below were battered by the same rain that had fallen on his grave. A plan formed in her mind, fully realized in an instant. It was not a plan of escape or rebellion. Those were impossible. It was a plan of conclusion. "Xin," she said, still gazing out the window, "I need you to do one last thing for me." "Anything, miss." "Go to my mother. Tell her I wish to make one request before I leave. A final filial gesture. Tell her I wish to visit the temple of the Guanyin on the Western Hill, to pray for a safe journey and to leave my maiden troubles behind." She turned, her eyes meeting Xin's. "Tell her I will go quietly, in the closed chair, with only the necessary attendants. But I must go, today." Xin, sensing the eerie finality in her mistress's tone, could only nod and hurry away. Madame Zhu, racked with guilt and grief over the ruin of her daughter's future, seized upon this show of pious resignation. Perhaps this act of prayer would bring some peace, some acceptance. She persuaded a reluctant Zhu Hong, who saw it as a harmless concession that would ensure her compliant departure. Arrangements were made. That afternoon, Ying Tai was dressed in the plain blue concubine's robes. She was led to a simple, curtained sedan chair waiting at the servant's gate. 4 bearers stood ready. Xin was permitted to accompany her, along with one older, stern maid from the Ma household who had been sent to collect her. As she was about to step into the chair, Ying Tai paused. She looked back at the home of her childhood, a place of silken imprisonment. She looked at her mother, standing in the gateway, a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. She looked at her father, who watched from an upstairs window, his expression unreadable. She felt nothing for them. They were already ghosts in a life that was over. She entered the chair. The curtains were drawn, plunging her into a dim, moving box. The bearers lifted the poles, and with a lurch, the journey began. But instead of turning east toward Hanzhou and the Ma residence, at the first crossroads, the lead bearer, following secret instructions and a hefty bribe of Ying Tai's last hidden jewels, passed through Shinshin, turned west toward the hills and the temple of Guanyin. The Ma family maid protested. "This is not the road." From within the chair, Ying Tai's voice, calm and authoritative, floated out. "We make a detour for blessings. My family has permitted it." Would you deny the goddess of mercy her due? The maid, cowed by the invocation of divine will and the unfamiliar route, fell silent. The sedan chair wound its way up the wooded hill. The sound of the bearer's grunts, the creak of bamboo, and the whisper of rain on the chair's roof were the only sounds. Inside the darkness, Ying Tai was perfectly still. She held in her hand the only thing she had taken from her old life, the jade lotus leaf pendant from her mother. Its cool surface was a tiny island of sensation. She was not going to pray. She was going to keep a promise. The river, blocked, would find a new course. And if that course led over a cliff, then so be it. The silent procession through the weeping landscape was not a journey to a new prison. It was a funeral march for Zhu Yingtai, and a pilgrimage to the only man who had ever truly seen her, even when he was blind. The fury of the earth. The Temple of Guanyin was a modest structure perched on a wooded bluff overlooking a sharp bend in the Shangyu River. It was a place of quiet refuge, its gray stone walls softened by moss, its single courtyard dominated by an ancient, gnarled cypress tree. Today, under the weeping sky, it was deserted. The monks were at their midday meditation, and the usual petitioners had stayed away due to the weather. The sedan chair was set down in the muddy clearing before the temple gates. The bearers, their task complete and their pockets heavy with Yingtai's jewels, melted quickly back into the forest paths, eager to be gone from this somber errand. The maid family maid stepped out, stretching her legs and looking around with a pinched, suspicious expression. "Be quick about your prayers," she snapped at the closed curtains. "This place gives me a chill." The curtain parted. Yingtai emerged. The plain blue robe hung on her frail frame, and the damp wind plucked at her short hair. Her face was pale, serene, and utterly terrifying in its emptiness. She held the jade pendant in one closed fist. "I will be quick," she said, her voice a monotone that seemed to absorb sound rather than project it. "Wait here." She did not look back at Xin, who stood trembling by the chair, her face a mask of terrified understanding. The maid huffed but remained by the chair, finding partial shelter under the temple's eaves. Yingtai walked through the open temple gate. The courtyard was a square of slick, black flagstones. Raindrops dripped from the cypress's needles with a sound like ticking seconds. She bypassed the main hall with its shadowy, golden statue of the merciful Bodhisattva. Her destination was the rear of the temple compound, where a small gate led to a path that wound along the cliff edge, a path used by monks for contemplative walks. The world seemed hyper-real. Each leaf, each stone, each droplet stood out in stark, painful clarity. The roar of the river below, swollen by the autumn rains, was a constant booming presence, a bass note to the treble of the wind and the patter of rain. The air smelled of wet earth, pine, and the mineral tang of churning water. She reached the cliff path. It was narrow, a ribbon of trodden dirt and rock clinging to the precipice. To her left was the sheer, mossy face of the bluff. To her right, a dizzying drop into the gorge, where the Shangyu River thrashed and boiled, its brown water flecked with white foam like rabid spit. She began to walk, not with haste, but with a deliberate, fatal purpose. The wind tugged at her robes, threatening to pluck her into the void. She did not falter. Her mind was not on the path, nor on the danger. It was fixed on a hillside in Hangzhou, a fresh mound of earth under the 10,000 pines. She saw his face, not as it was at the end, but as it had been in the library, lit with the joy of a shared idea. She heard his voice, gentle, earnest, saying, "You are the best friend I have ever had, Jilong." She had reached a point where the path curved around a protruding shoulder of rock. Below, the river executed a violent turn, its force slamming against the cliff base with a sound like crumbling mountains. This was the place. She stopped. She turned to face the gorge, the wind whipping her hair and flattening her robes against her body. The cold, wet air filled her lungs, and for the first time in years, she took a deep, unconstricted breath. It was bracing, painful, and pure. From the pocket of her robe, she drew out a small, sharp sliver of polished stone she had secreted away days before. It was not a weapon, but a tool. With a sudden, fierce motion, she drew it across the palm of her left hand. The pain was sharp, clean, a bright line of sensation. Blood, shockingly red against her pallid skin, welled up and began to drip, each drop swallowed by the hungry wind before it could hit the ground. She closed her fist around the jade pendant, letting her blood slick its surface. Then she raised her voice. It was not a scream, but a clear, high cry that cut through the roar of wind and water. A cry that contained all the poetry she had never been allowed to speak, all the love she had never been allowed to voice, all the fury of a spirit denied its rightful shape. Shanbo! The name was a lance thrown into the heart of the storm. The dream is over. The mountain spirit comes to you. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she was not on a cliff. She was under the cassia tree at Wansong, the sun warm on her face, his shoulder a comforting presence beside hers. She was whole. She was known. She was free. She stepped forward into the empty air. The descent was not a fall, but a surrender. The wind roared in her ears, a sound that became the remembered sigh of 10,000 pines. The cold spray from the raging river below felt like the mist of a morning at the academy. She did not feel impact. There was a moment of profound, shattering cold, a sense of immense pressure, and then release. The river, that relentless, uncaring force, took her. It folded her into its turbulent heart. The blue robe, a dark flower for an instant before being submerged, torn, and carried away. The jade pendant, slick with her blood, was wrenched from her grip, sinking into the murky depths to be buried in silt. Back on the cliff path, the only evidence was a few smeared droplets of blood on a rain-washed rock, and the lingering echo of a name that had already been swallowed by the gorge's eternal noise. At the temple gate, Sing Shen, who had crept forward, sank to her knees in the mud, a wail of absolute despair tearing from her throat. The Ma family maid, finally sensing the true nature of the tragedy, began to shriek, her cries echoing emptily against the temple walls. The earth had not reacted to the small human drama on its cliffs. The river did not pause. The rain did not cease. But in the village below, and later in Shangyu town, people would swear that at that very moment the wind had risen to an unnatural shriek, and the river's roar had deepened into something like a groan of sorrow. They would speak of seeing two strange, large butterflies, one of a soft, scholarly blue, the other a pale, silvery white, tumbling together in the gale above the river before spiraling upward, defying the rain, toward the shrouded heavens. A folktale born in the immediate aftermath, a testament to the human need for a beauty that could transcend such a brutal, ugly end. But on the bluff there was only the empty path, the weeping maid, the shrieking stranger, and the relentless, indifferent fury of the earth and water, which had claimed another fragile, beautiful thing, as it had claimed countless others before and would claim countless more after. The threads unwoven. The aftermath of Yingtai's disappearance was a silent, seismic shock that radiated through the lives she left behind, unraveling them in different ways. At the temple of Guanyin, chaos turned into grim procedure. The Ma family maid's hysterics brought the monks from their meditation. Sin Shin, catatonic with grief, could only point mutely toward the cliff path. A search was mounted, but the river was a ravenous, churning beast. No body was recovered that day or the next. The jade pendant was lost to the silt. Only a few tattered scraps of dark blue cloth, snagged on a jagged root partway down the cliff face, confirmed the tale. News reached the Zhu estate like a physical blow. Madame Zhu, upon hearing the report from the trembling, mud-spattered servants, let out a sound that was not a scream, but a long, silent exhalation of all hope. She collapsed, and did not rise from her bed for a month, drifting in a fog of opium and grief. The daughter she had tried to shape and save had chosen the only shape left to her: dissolution. Zhu Hong's reaction was a terrifying, frozen silence. The scandal he had sought to bury with a quiet concubinage had now exploded into a public tragedy tinged with supernatural rumor. The alliance with the Ma family was irrevocably poisoned. Administrator Ma, furious at the waste and the lingering stink of scandal, demanded the return of every betrothal gift plus compensation for his son's humiliation. The Zhu family's finances, already strained, were crippled. Their social standing in Shangyu cracked and began to crumble. Zhu Hong, who had valued reputation above all, watched his life's work disintegrate. He became a ghost in his own house, spending hours locked in his study, staring at the wall, the weight of his unyielding decisions turning his heart to stone. In Hangzhou, the story arrived in fragments, carried by merchants and traveling monks. The tale of the Zhu daughter's tragic end at the Cliff Temple merged with the earlier tragedy of the scholar's death on the road to Wansong. The names were whispered together, Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai. The details were murky: a secret love, a forced marriage, a double suicide separated by days and distance. The very ambiguity fed the legend. It was a story too poetically potent to be constrained by mere facts. The rumor reached Wansong Academy. In the third courtyard, the students who had known them, Zhu Zhulong and Liang Shanbo, fell into a stunned, reflective silence. The petty gossip Ma Wensai had spread now curdled in their mouths, tasting like ashes. They remembered the two friends, their closeness, the palpable bond that had made others uneasy. With the new, tragic context, their perception shifted. What had seemed peculiar now seemed profound. What had been mocked as unnatural was reframed as a transcendent connection brutally severed by the world. Scholar Master Li wept openly in his sparse chamber. He lit incense for both his lost sprouts. He took out the joint essays they had written, their handwriting so complementary on the page, and felt a pang of loss for the future scholarship that had been extinguished. Chancellor Wang received the news with his customary impassivity, but those who served him noticed he spent a long afternoon walking alone through the pine forest. When he returned, he issued a quiet decree. A small, unmarked memorial stone was to be placed near the cassia tree in the third courtyard garden. It bore no names, only a single carved line from the Book of Songs. Heaven made a match, far apart they were kept. It was the only eulogy he would offer, and the most fitting one. The deepest unraveling occurred in the modest Liang household. Shanbo's parents, already shattered by their son's death, were visited by a strange, hollow-eyed young woman a week after the cliffside tragedy. It was Xin. She had fled the Zhu household, carrying nothing but a small bundle and a burden of truth too heavy to bear alone. She knelt before Shanbo's mother and father. "I was made to Zhu Yingtai," she whispered, her voice scraped raw. "My mistress, she was not what the world saw. She was the scholar Zhu Zhulong." Over cups of bitter tea in their poor, clean home, Xin told them everything. The secret studies, the disguise, the years at Wansong, the deep, intellectual bond that had blossomed between their son and the girl in boy's clothing. She spoke of Yingtai's despair, of the forced marriage, of the moment Shanbo had understood at the banquet. She told them of the river stone, of the final, bloody vow on the cliff. They loved each other, Xin concluded, tears streaming silently. Not in a way the world has a name for. They were two halves of one thought, and the world broke them for it. Shanbo's mother listened, her work-worn hands clutching her son's spectacles. Her grief, which had been a sharp, personal wound, now expanded into a vast, cosmic sorrow. She understood her son's heartbreak, his fever, his death, in a new and devastating light. He had not died of a simple illness. He had died of a broken heart, of a truth too beautiful and too terrible to survive. Her husband, a man of few words, stood and walked to the small altar where Shanbo's spirit tablet rested. He placed the river stone, with its white lightning bolt, before the tablet. Then, next to it, he placed an empty space, a silent acknowledgement for the spirit that had no tablet, the girl who had been his son's other half. Shin-Sin stayed with them. She had nowhere else to go, and in their shared, complicated grief, they formed a new, fragile family. She helped Shanbo's mother with the weaving, and in the evenings she would sometimes tell stories about her mistress, not the tragic bride, but the brilliant scholar who could recite zhuangzi and fix a loose shutter with equal skill. The threads of the tapestry were unwoven, a family disgraced, a union annihilated, a friendship re-understood as a tragedy, a household of grief finding solace in truth. The raw, brutal facts of the matter were being absorbed into the social fabric, leaving behind stains of scandal, whispers of sympathy, and the first faint glimmers of a legend. The lovers were gone, but the story of their love was just beginning to breathe, to grow, to take on a life of its own, independent of the frail, mortal vessels that had carried it. It was a story waiting for. The lovers were gone, but the story of their love was just beginning to breathe, to grow, to take on a life of its own, independent of the frail, mortal vessels that had carried it. It was a story waiting for its final transformative chapter, a chapter not of death, but of metamorphosis. The eternal flutter. Time, the great river, flowed on. The raw, jagged edges of the tragedy smoothed, worn down by seasons and retellings. The Leng family, with Shin-Shin now as adopted daughter, found a meager peace. They tended Shanbo's grave on the hillside overlooking the Chantang, and in spring they would place a second, small bunch of wildflowers beside his headstone, for her. In Shangyu, the Zhu estate never recovered its former prestige. Zhu Hong died a few years later, a bitter, isolated man. Madame Zhu lived out her days in a quiet nunnery, her grief her only companion. The Ma family, though politically successful, was forever shadowed by the whispered tale. Ma Wenkai's marriages were unhappy, and he was said to start at the sight of butterflies. But it was in the spaces between these hard facts that the legend truly took root. It began among the common people, the farmers along the Chantang, the silk weavers of Shangyu, the boatmen on the rivers. They were not concerned with scholarly scandal or familial disgrace. They heard a story of two young hearts, brilliant and true, crushed by the unyielding stone of tradition. They heard of a love so potent it could not be contained by mortal bodies or societal walls. The first ballads appeared within a year. Traveling minstrels, with their ehers and plaintive voices, sang of the scholar and the maiden in blue. The details were romanticized, simplified. They were childhood sweethearts, separated by her family's ambition, reunited in death. The cliff and the fever became a single stormy night. Their spirits, the songs claimed, refused to part. Then the dreams began. People from unrelated villages who had never met Shanbo or Yingtai reported similar visions. A young man in blue robes and a young woman in silvery white, walking hand in hand through a field of eternal spring flowers. They were always seen from behind, always moving away, but the air around them shimmered with a profound, quiet joy. Those who dreamed of them woke with a strange sense of peace, a lingering sorrow that was sweet, not bitter. The most potent transformation, however, was wrought by the natural world itself. On the anniversary of Shanbo's death, and again near the date of Yingtai's disappearance, a peculiar phenomenon was observed at the sites linked to them. At Wansong Academy, students noticed that the previously unremarkable cassia tree in the third courtyard garden began to bloom not only in autumn, but with a second, fainter flowering in late spring, a time associated with neither of their deaths, but with the height of their friendship. The blossoms were said to have a sweeter, more haunting fragrance. On the cliff path near the temple of Guanyin, where wildflowers were scarce due to the rocky soil, a particular species of small white orchid with a blue-streaked heart began to proliferate. It was a flower no botanist could readily identify, and it grew nowhere else in the region. The locals called it the lover's sigh. But the most enduring, breathtaking symbol was the butterflies. Every spring, as the warmth returned to the Zhejiang valleys, a remarkable migration occurred. A specific pair of butterfly species, one a deep, velvety blue reminiscent of a scholar's robe, the other a luminous, silvery white like the finest silk, would appear in great numbers. They were not commonly seen together elsewhere. Yet here they danced in inseparable pairs. The people saw them fluttering over the winding road between Hanzhou and Shanyu, the path Shanbo had walked in despair. They saw them dancing above the grave on the hillside, their wings touching the wildflowers left there. Most poignantly, they were seen in a spiraling, joyful duet above the roaring gorge near the temple, defying the downdrafts, forever dancing on the edge of the abyss that had claimed the maiden. A traveling monk versed in Buddhist lore witnessed this aerial ballet. He said to the gathered villagers, "Do not mourn them. The body is but a cocoon, a temporary dwelling for the soul. Their love was too pure, their bond too strong for the dust of this world. They have shed their earthly sorrows. They have become Hun and Po, the spiritual and earthly souls, united, not separated. They are free." The idea took flight like the butterflies themselves. They were no longer tragic ghosts, but liberated spirits. Their story was no longer a cautionary tale about disobedience, but a testament to love's ultimate, transformative power. They had lost the battle against the world, but they had won the war for eternity. Temples, both Buddhist and Taoist, began to incorporate them into their teachings. They became symbols of faithful love, of the soul's ability to transcend earthly constraints. Young lovers facing parental opposition would make secret vows before a pair of carved jade butterflies. Women trapped in unhappy marriages would whisper prayers to them for spiritual solace. The legend filtered back into the scholarly class, now softened by time and poetic license. Poets wrote elegant verses about the butterfly lovers. Playwrights adapted the story for the stage, the tragic climax always followed by a beautiful, lyrical transformation scene, where the actors in blue and white silks would be lifted away on wires as painted butterflies descended from the rafters. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell. The specific names of Zhu Hong and Administrator Ma were forgotten, but the names Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai endured. They became archetypes. Their story was painted on porcelain, woven into tapestries, set to music for the pipa and guzheng. In a quiet corner of the modern world, in a museum far from China, a delicate scroll painting is displayed. It shows a youthful scholar and a beautiful maiden standing near a winding mountain path. But look closer. From their sleeves, from the folds of their robes, tiny, exquisite butterflies are emerging, taking to a sky painted the color of dawn. The caption reads simply, "The Butterfly Lovers, Jin Dynasty Folklore, a story of love, loss, and eternal union." And on a sunny day in early summer, in a garden in Hangzhou near the site of the long-vanished Wansong Academy, a child points to the air. "Look, the blue one and the white one, they're always together." And an elder smiles, a look of ancient knowing in their eyes. Yes, little one, they always are, and they always will be. For in the end, the world that could not make room for Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai was forced to make room for their story. It is a story that whispers, love is not a transaction, identity is not a cage, and the human spirit, in its most ardent longing, can achieve a form of immortality that bypasses stone tablets and official histories. It takes flight on fragile, beautiful wings, forever dancing in the sun-dappled space between what is and what could be, a silent, fluttering testament to the dream that refused to die.